The 1950s. Alice and Jack live in a typical American town. They hang out with friends, have fun, drive around, and love each other. One day, while Alice is getting ready for a party with friends, Jack goes to work with a crowd of other white collars. A female voice narrates that today is the 997th day. All employees are on their way to headquarters. All residents are safe and accounted for. Ladies are wished a good day, and Alice starts her household chores. Then she goes to her dance classes, like all the exemplary wives in town. The instructor, Shelley, reminds them, beauty is in control and grace is in symmetry. After the class, Alice returns home, chats with her neighbor Bonnie, who constantly scolds her children, and goes to take down the dried laundry. A catchy tune constantly plays in Alice's head, and she hums it. Suddenly, she notices another neighbor, Margaret, standing in front of her house, oblivious to her surroundings. Alice starts cooking, but one egg arouses her suspicion. She squeezes it in her hand and the egg turns out to be empty. She crushes the rest, they're all hollow. This activity is interrupted by burnt meat. In the evening, she greets her husband, beautifully dressed, with her hair done, and at a set table. However, her husband decides to start with another, more pleasant activity. The next day, the women relax by the pool. Alice is distracted, the song in her head again causing her concern. Then a visual sequence appears, a circle of women in wigs. Later, Alice approaches a model of the town and mindlessly traces her finger along the streets. And when she leaves the town limits, Bonnie picks her up. It's time for cocktails served by her children. During this time, the men discuss distracting topics. Everything is decent, sunny, and calm. A signal sounds, and Shelley welcomes the new residents. She is happy that the couple can learn from her husband, Frank, who has created something extraordinary, a new world. Margaret interrupts Shelley's speech, saying she and her husband shouldn't be here. Alice's husband hastily leads her away, and the newly appeared Frank apologizes to the guests. The couple is going through a tough time. They're tasked to chase dreams and confront chaos, the main enemy of progress. And they all change the world. The guests echo Frank's words. Everyone here is happy, they are all one family. The man thanks the women for supporting their husbands, they are their support. The fun continues. Alice goes to find Jack, but finds Margaret, who says she has nightmares she can't be here, but Alice's husband quickly pulls the curtain in front of Alice. Alice finds her husband in the house. Jack kisses her, and the couple gets some alone time. But at the brightest moment, Alice sees Frank, who, smiling, watches their lovemaking. Later, the women gather in a shopping center and discuss their perfect lives, and poor Margaret. Alice feels sorry for her neighbor, though Bonnie thinks she brought the trouble on herself. After all, she took her son into the desert by herself. They found her, but without the child. The conversation turns to what the men are doing. No one knows for sure, but it's said that they are making weapons. Bonnie cuts in. That's not their business. Women also do work. They create comfort. At night, Alice has a nightmare, but in the morning, as usual, she sees her husband off to work and starts her household chores. Then she goes on a trip. She is the only one left on the trolley bus and says she just wants to ride. Suddenly, she sees a plane flying towards the mountains, and then it crashes. Alice yells to the driver, but he doesn't understand what she wants. She urges him to help the victims, but he is on his route and cannot deviate. Alice jumps out of the trolleybus and runs towards the mountains. She walks a long way through the desert, then reaches a road and climbs a high mountain, topped by a strange dome. She approaches closer and stops at a mirrored glass. Around her, no one, only her reflection. Alice raises her hands to the glass and loses consciousness. In front of her in the darkness, a circle of dancing women and a male voice calls for order. People must allow themselves to discover what life should be like. The next moment, Alice finds herself on her bed. Coming to the kitchen, she sees Jack preparing dinner. The dishes are in disarray, many groceries spoiled. Alice doesn't understand what's happening, and her husband explains that when he came from work, she was already asleep, and she returned home on the trolley bus. Alice doesn't understand. Did the driver come back for her? But now Jack looks at his wife uncomprehendingly. Alice decides she saw everything in a dream. The next morning, everything goes as usual. Alice sends her husband off and starts cleaning the window glass, but suddenly it seems to move. It presses her against the wall, and the woman is gasping for air. The next moment, the phone rings and Alice is completely free. Margaret's voice on the phone urges her to get out of there. After all, she was there and saw it all herself. Alice again sees dancing women, but now it is herself and her friends. and suddenly, instead of her own reflection, Margaret appears, approaching the mirror from the other side and starts banging her head against the surface. Alice screams and comes to. She runs home and sees Margaret on the roof of her house. Turning to Alice, the woman cuts her own throat and falls down. Alice screams in horror, and the arriving employees pick her up and carry away the neighbor's body. In the evening, she tries to explain to Jack, but he doesn't believe his wife. Margaret is in the hospital. She accidentally cut herself while washing windows. Alice feels guilty because her neighbor asked for help. What is happening around them? She asks him to tell her what he is doing on the project, but he cannot talk about it. He asks her to stop the hysterics, which could ruin everything. At night, Alice watches an advertisement for their town and catches herself thinking that it feels like she is floundering in a pool from which it is impossible to swim out. In the morning, she is cooking and suddenly starts wrapping her head with cling film. Alice seems to want to bring herself to her senses, but even the suffocation doesn't help, and she tears off the film. The arriving doctor assures the woman that it's just nervous strain, as Alice witnessed Margaret falling. The woman again insists that her neighbor slit her own throat. The doctor suggests prescribing her pills, but Jack refuses. They will cope. The doctor assures Margaret will soon recover and return home. He leaves, forgetting his briefcase, from which Alice manages to pull out a folder with Margaret's personal file. But all the text is smeared, unreadable. Alice burns the folder. She drinks alcohol and again sees dancing women. Then she finds herself in the bathroom. Jack is unhappy. They will be late, and he brings her a dress. Then he asks Alice to think about having a child, and tonight they have a wonderful evening ahead. The couple arrives at a restaurant where all the town's residents have already gathered. A performance by a glamorous blonde is demonstrated to the audience, and Alice again sees the circle of women and Margaret killing herself. Alice feels ill, but those around her do not notice. Frank gives a speech and invites Jack on stage. He is ready to congratulate the man as he is now entering the senior expert council. He presents Jack with a token of loyalty, a ring. The audience applauds, and Jack performs a dance of gratitude. Alice, unable to watch this, runs to the bathroom. She has a vision of another Jack who has lost his job. A perplexed Bonnie finds her. Alice tries to explain something, but her friend interrupts her. Was Alice at the headquarters? Has she gone mad? She's acting like a spoiled child. Her job is to support her husband, yet she is ruining his career. And now she is behaving like Margaret. Returning to the hall, Alice watches Jack's triumph and restrains herself. In the morning, Jack reminds her that they will have guests in the evening. She needs to express gratitude to Frank. Alice greets the guests with a smile on her face. Everything, as always, is perfect. Her husband meets Frank while Alice finishes the appetizers. The man enters the kitchen and suddenly starts talking to the hostess. He regrets that Bonnie didn't believe her, but she didn't believe Margaret either. He has been waiting a long time for someone to challenge him. The guests sit down at the table. Alice demonstratively takes the host's seat. Jack, complying, sits next to her. The conversation about nothing begins. Suddenly Alice asks why all the women in the town are from one, at most two states, and they all vacation in the same places. Jack tries to steer the conversation away, but Alice continues. They all met their husbands on a train under similar circumstances. All their stories are the same because they are told what to remember, but sometimes they suddenly remember the forbidden. Frank is doing something with all of them. The man, smirking, reminds her of her nervous breakdown. Why isn't she getting treated? And why was she at the headquarters? Jack is horrified. She was at the headquarters? Frank continues. She broke the rules. It's the result of psychosis, but she revealed herself to him in his bedroom. Alice is stunned by such a dreadful lie, but Jack believes Frank unconditionally. The woman tries to appeal to the guests' common sense. Where do these products come from? And what's in them? But then Shelley stands up. She will no longer allow her husband to be insulted. The guests leave. Frank is disappointed. He expected something more interesting from her. Jack, having seen everyone out, returns to the house. Alice tries to convey to him that he is the most precious person to her. And she asks to leave here, anywhere, just together. And Jack agrees. They leave the house and get into the car, and then the husband apologizes to his wife, but in the next moment employees pull her out of the car and carry her into the darkness. Alice finds herself on an operating table. Visions with her husband pass by. A doctor in a mask leans over her, in which she recognizes herself. In the next moment, Dr. Alice finishes the operation and goes home, where her unemployed husband meets her. He hasn't prepared dinner because he didn't know what she would want. There's also no hot water. Alice is very tired. She has been standing at the operating table for 30 hours, so she denies her husband intimacy. He sits at the monitor and listens to the advertisement for a new simulation. And again, a sunny morning in Paradise Town. Alice returns to her surroundings. An enthusiastic Bonnie meets her and shares the latest news. Alice hugs her children and does not notice her friend's worried look. Her husband goes to work. Alice does household chores, dances, and swims. And she meets her husband. She takes the roast out of the oven while Jack picks a record, humming a song that seems to wake Alice up. Jack walks through the dark city, entering his apartment. Meanwhile, his physical characteristics are narrated. He is absolutely fit to participate in the Victory Project with his friend Alice, and he takes on the responsibility of maintaining his wife's body's vital functions. Alice sees herself in bed, restrained and entangled with wires. Jack cares for her body because he is obliged to exit the simulation each day and work to afford it. The man lies down next to her and hums the song that Alice is hearing now. She realizes he has deprived her of real life, but the man did this to save her from constant work. Frank created this world so they could live as they wanted. He works like a damned soul for this, but she is happy. But what about the others? So they really are hostages. Jack hugs her, but Alice hits him on the head. The next moment, Bonnie finds her. Jack is dead, and she immediately reports it to Frank. Bonnie confesses that she knows everything about the simulation. She chose this life herself because here she can be with her children, who are alive. But other women know nothing. Alice must run, or they will kill her. The woman steps out into the yard, goes to Jack's car, and drives into the desert. Employees chase after her. Cars catch up with her, but Alice, making a maneuver, causes a collision in which a doctor dies. Her pursuers continue the chase. Frank is informed of the incident. He orders the woman to be captured at all costs. In the next moment, Shelley stabs him with a knife. He is a fool and has botched everything. Alice races towards the mountain, but near the summit, her car stalls. She continues on foot. Employees pursue her, and there ahead, the dome. The woman approaches it, her pursuers just steps behind her, and suddenly feels her husband's hands on her shoulders, asking her not to leave him. Shelley reaches out. A strike. Darkness. Visions of the perfect life and victory. And a sigh from a woman waking up in reality. That case when it's hard to take someone's side. The husband deprived his wife of reality with good intentions to make her happy, and probably many would want to escape into the simulation from everyday problems. But can you make someone happy against their will? Every day, a young fisherman named Syracuse sets out to fish off the coast of Ireland. One day, he finds a young woman in his nets. He helps her, and when she regains consciousness, he is relieved to see that she seems unharmed. However, she behaves quite strangely and refuses to go to the hospital. She also can't remember her name, which Syracuse attributes to amnesia. He takes her to his late mother's house, offers her some sandwiches, and suggests she stay there for a while. He needs to go see his daughter. Annie lives with his ex-wife, Maura, and today he has to take the girl to dialysis. While the procedure is ongoing, he tells Annie a story about a fisherman who caught a woman from the sea. Annie explains that it was likely a selkie, a creature she learned about at school. Sometimes they come ashore until the sea calls them back. After the procedure, Syracuse takes Annie back to her mother, who is eager to show her the new electric wheelchair she received. Annie shows off the chair to her father, but her mother immediately criticizes him for not talking to the doctor about a new kidney for their daughter. The next morning, Syracuse finds a woman washing clothes in a stream, singing in an unknown language. She asks if she can come with him, and he lets her board his boat. On the way, she says her name is Ondine, which means from the water. Soon, Syracuse's boat stops for lobster fishing, but the baskets come up empty. Ondine begins to sing a song that Syracuse has never heard before, and suddenly every basket is filled with a catch. She helps him pull them out and is surprised when he throws the smaller ones and extras back into the sea. However, she flatly refuses to go with him to the market. He sells the lobsters to the astonished buyers and purchases a dress at a store. Then he heads to pick up Annie from school. On the way home, he continues the story about the fisherman and the woman from the sea. She sings to the fish, and he catches them. Both are happy. Annie thinks it's a dream because everything seems like his dream coming true. Moreover, no one knows the language she sings in. After dropping his daughter off at home, Syracuse heads back, not noticing that the curious girl is following him. He gives Ondine some clothes and food when he reaches the house and finds her talking to his father, who asks how long she'll be staying in his house. Hearing that it's up to him, Syracuse decides she'll stay forever to live with him happily ever after, like in the fairy tale he's been making up with Annie. After seeing everything with her own eyes, Annie goes to the library and asks for books about Selkies. Meanwhile, Syracuse goes to church to confess, admitting he's an alcoholic, even though he hasn't drunk for over 2 years. Lately, he's been haunted by a dream where he attends the funeral of his ex-wife's new husband, Alex, after which he reunites with Maura, who still struggles with alcohol problems. The priest advises him to see a psychologist, but Syracuse reminds him of the secrecy of confession and tells him that he pulled a woman out of the water with his net. Now he's hiding her from everyone else. The priest asks him to come to Mass as there's no other way he can help him. Meanwhile, Annie is studying legends about Selkies. Ondine cleans the cottage and then examines the new things Syracuse brought her. She's particularly intrigued by the fishnet stockings, which she stretches over one hand, making them look webbed. The next day, Annie goes to her grandmother's cottage and sees Ondine swimming. The girl boldly approaches the shore and declares that she knew all along. The story about the fisherman and the Selkie isn't a fairy tale. Annie tells her about her illness and asks her to heal her, but Ondine doesn't know magic and says so. The girl asks a lot of questions, and Ondine likes the lively and straightforward child. Annie asks her to always tell the truth, because what's the point of friendship otherwise? She's very curious about what it's like underwater. Is it better or worse than here? Ondine says it varies, but singing is easier there. Annie shares everything she's learned about Selkies from the books. They can stay on land for up to 7 years until they find happiness with a human. Then she abruptly shifts the conversation to her grandmother because her father still misses her very much. Remembering her mother, Annie prepares to go home, and Ondine asks her to come back again. Syracuse also goes to the library to borrow books about Selkies, only to find out that Annie has already taken them. Meanwhile, Annie meets up with the neighborhood kids who show off their bikes, and she lets one of the girls play with her wheelchair before it runs out of power and rolls into the water. The kids abandon Annie, and she has to make her way home where she's met by Alex. He recharges her battery and tells her that Selkies were invented in his homeland of Scotland, but the girl insists that Ondine speaks a different language. Meanwhile, Syracuse finds Ondine on a pontoon in the middle of the bay and offers to take her back to his boat. He asks her to hold the tiller, but when a patrol boat speeds by, Ondine hides and steers the boat with her foot. Syracuse teases her, noting that she manages just fine with her feet. She starts singing again as he pulls up his net and discovers it's filled with a bountiful catch of salmon, which his nets usually can't catch. Before he can fully enjoy his luck, Syracuse sees the patrol boat returning. The wildlife officers find the salmon and demand to see the nets he used to catch them. He shows them the usual nets for catching salmon, but they're completely dry, meaning he's telling the truth. However, the men notice Ondine hiding in the hold. She confirms that Syracuse caught the salmon in an ordinary net, and they leave the boat. Relieved that the officers believe their story and that nothing happened when Ondine was seen by people, they head to the harbor together to sell the catch. Syracuse offers to buy her a gift, and she asks for another dress, which she'll choose herself. On the way to the store, they run into Annie, who's thrilled that their story isn't just a fairy tale. The girl helps Ondine pick out an outfit while the townspeople gawk at the pretty stranger through the shop window. Later, Annie arrives at her grandmother's house, which looks festive and cozy thanks to Ondine's efforts. Ondine offers to teach the girl how to swim, and she agrees since she'll have someone from the sea by her side. They both play in the shallow water when Ondine suddenly sees something in the water and asks Annie to get on the raft. She pulls out a bundle, which Annie calls Selkie clothing. According to legend, if she buries it in the ground, she'll be able to stay on land for 7 years, provided her sea husband doesn't come for her. After listening to Annie, Ondine buries the find in the greenhouse, and Annie counts the steps to remember the exact spot. Later, she tells her father about it and advises him to watch out for strangers. Meanwhile, they all head to the local festival by boat, and Ondine denies Annie's claim that she can grant wishes because she's not really a Selkie. Upset, Annie pretends that her wheelchair brakes have failed and falls off the pier, hoping to test the truth of her words. Ondine jumps in to save her and pulls the girl to the surface. Syracuse carries Annie home and hands her over to Maura and Alex. Later, Ondine tells Syracuse that the wheelchair's brakes work just fine and that Annie was testing her ability to breathe underwater. He confesses that he used to drink heavily, but one day he returned from a trip to find Annie's mother sleeping next to their unconscious child. They saved the girl, and he decided that one of them had to stay sober at all times. Meanwhile, Maura tells Annie that a dark-haired stranger has been looking for the fisherman's girlfriend, which causes the girl to have a nightmare. Meanwhile, Syracuse and Ondine become intimate. Later, he goes to confession and admits to the priest that he sinned with Ondine the night before, and now he fears the luck she brings because he's long lost hope for the best. He knows that something wonderful or terrible will happen, and he's afraid of both. After the conversation, the fisherman steps outside and is approached by an unknown man who starts asking questions about Ondine. Syracuse ignores him and walks away. That day, he takes Annie to dialysis as usual, but when they return home, no one is there. Maura and Alex had been out drinking at the nearby pub. Syracuse takes the girl there. Finally reaching home, he finds the doors broken in and Ondine nowhere to be found. Syracuse searches the shore and eventually finds her hiding. She reminds him of the Selkie's husband and says he's here to take her away. Meanwhile, the intoxicated Maura is riding her daughter's wheelchair and, despite Alex's warnings, is determined to make it home on it. Syracuse hides Ondine in a secret cave behind the waterfall, offering to grant her a wish, but her only wish is for Annie to get well, so he wishes for her to be able to stay. Meanwhile, the man searching for Ondine is driving around town and gets into a car accident, colliding with a car driven by the intoxicated Maura. Alex is thrown through the windshield. Annie, however, manages to buckle up, but still sustains injuries. Syracuse and Ondine, driving by, recognize the car. Syracuse screams and rushes at the medics as they load Annie onto a stretcher to take her to the hospital. Later, they find the girl in the hospital and learn that she's undergoing an immediate kidney transplant from Alex, who, by a stroke of luck, was a compatible match. Meanwhile, the unknown man meets Ondine in the hallway. He wonders why she speaks their language because neither of them belongs here. The sea spat her out, but this is not their world. The woman asks him to return home without her. The next morning, Annie wakes up and immediately asks where Ondine is. Syracuse reassures her that they'll see her soon. Sometime later, a cremation ceremony for Alex takes place. Maura scatters his ashes over the sea, regretting that this time she can't blame her ex-husband for everything. She asks him to take Annie, but demands that he get rid of Ondine, and she forces her husband to drink to Alex's soul. In a drunken state, Syracuse goes to the boat where Ondine is hiding and, calling her a Selkie, takes her out to sea where he demands that she return to her husband and sing her songs to him. He takes her to the foot of the lighthouse and continues to insist that she needs to leave. He leaves her there and prepares to sail away, believing that life isn't a fairy tale. People and Selkies can't be together. Ondine asks for a chance to say goodbye to Annie, but he sails away. As dusk falls, the log she's sitting on gives her silhouette the appearance of a woman with a tail. Waiting for nightfall, she jumps into the sea. In the morning, the priest wakes up a depressed Syracuse, who realizes he's made a big mistake. He brings Annie from the hospital to his home. The girl comforts him, saying that Ondine will come back because she left something here. Later, Annie watches TV, where the Icelandic band Sigur Rós is performing, and suddenly Syracuse recognizes the words. He realizes that Ondine was an ordinary woman and rushes to the lighthouse. At first, he can't find her anywhere and runs along the shore, shouting, but soon he sees a fire where Ondine is warming herself. At first, she says she's a sea creature who found her magical clothes and buried them so she could stay forever with the family she loves. But Syracuse demands the truth, and then Ondine admits that she was a courier delivering illegal substances from Romania. She was in a boat with a backpack full of substances when the police closed in. Her guard threw her into the water because he couldn't swim. She swam until she couldn't anymore, and then she drowned. But she got caught in Syracuse's net. The girl tells him her real name, Ioana. The fisherman takes her home where criminals are already waiting, having taken Annie hostage. Syracuse tries to fight them off, but he can't handle two armed men. The girl told him the story about the Selkie's clothing buried in the greenhouse, and the men demand to be shown the spot. Everyone heads to the greenhouse to dig up the goods, but they find nothing because Annie has hidden the Selkie's clothing elsewhere. Ondine promises to stay with Annie, and she admits that she hid the package in the lobster crate. Everyone heads to the boat, but when the criminals lift the basket, Annie reminds Ondine that she's a Selkie, and they are not. Ondine throws one of the villains overboard. He drowns while Syracuse throws the other Romanian into the water, disarming him. The arriving police arrest the criminal along with Ondine, who faces deportation unless she gains citizenship, or she could get married. Later, Annie goes to confession and says that her father's getting married soon, even though she wasn't a real Selkie. But you can't marry a seal, can you? In the final scenes, a girl in a white dress and a fisherman in a suit sail off on their boat for a honeymoon, bringing to life the fairy tale about the happiness of a human in a Selkie. That's where the movie ends. 1,000 years ago, the first settlers left Earth and formed the League of Free Worlds. Some got warm, sun-drenched planets, while others were fated to be born on a planet covered with impenetrable swamps. People built a model city there where order, prosperity, and total control reigned. Christie was among those who couldn't reconcile with such an existence, which landed her in prison. But since there is no death penalty on planet XT-59, a group of 10 prisoners is sentenced to lifelong exile in the swamps. If lucky, they might reach the Paradise Islands, but no one recalls such instances since the swamps are teeming with dangerous creatures. This time, as the prisoners were prepared for their last journey, the captain incapacitates one of the prisoners, his head shrouded in a sack, and orders him to move forward. The prisoner inquires about the security barrier and begins to move very cautiously. He miraculously avoids the hit from the security's invisible barrier, and the captain orders to deactivate the protection. Then, the captain reads the sentence and removes the sack from the prisoner's head, followed by an order to give the prisoners a metal box with supplies. They have an hour to set off, or the guards will kill them on the spot. One of the women goes into hysteria, claiming she's a tourist and innocent. She tries to run, but Christie catches and calms the unfortunate woman. The prisoner, freed from the sack, suggests that people introduce themselves. He is Irwin, but the initiative is intercepted by the formidable-looking Youst, nicknamed the Polar Wolf, who knows these swamps well as it's not his first exile. The wolf wants to know everything about each member of the team, but their acquaintance is interrupted by the appearance of a dangerous local creature living underground, called the Pagan. The creature senses vibration and moves towards it, dragging its prey underground. Christie declares that she intends to only listen to Irwin. Youst reminds her of his superiority, to which Irwin proposes to divide the supplies and opens the box. He manages to grab only a knife when the others pounce on the box with supplies. The wolf again reminds everyone that he's the boss, but Irwin refuses to listen to a prisoner and announces his departure to the Paradise Islands. Christie joins him, but first, they want their share of the supplies. The wolf's henchman tries to claim rights over Christie. Then Irwin puts a knife to his throat, reminding that any attempt of the prisoners to destroy each other will result in them being immediately shot on the spot. So, the wolf has no choice but to give the pair their share of supplies. Additionally, Irwin requests the metal box itself in exchange for a portion of food, and the wolf agrees to give it away. The wolf orders his group to prepare for the journey when Christie asks Irwin to help the helpless tourist. But he refuses. That woman is already dead, even though she doesn't know it. Irwin explains to Christie that she should go first because she is lighter than him, and he will be able to pull her out if she falls into the swamp. At that time, a voice from the fortress commands the prisoners to lave the shore. The wolf leads his team forward. Irwin and Christie tie a heavy box with ropes and also set off. Suddenly, a shot is fired from the fortress. People hide behind the rocks, and Irwin realizes that he was the intended target. He forces Christie to crawl out of the dangerous square. Along the way, the girl notices small, crawling creatures, but Irwin assures her of their harmlessness, suggesting they could be their food, which disgusts Christie. Soon, the pair reach a relatively safe place and confirm that Wolf's team is following their trail. Watching how Irwin calculates everything in advance and can find a solution to any problem, Christie worries, trying to understand who the man was before his exile. The girl doubts the existence of Paradise Islands, to which Irwin rightly remarks that then they wouldn't have tried to kill him. After all, the guards would have been sure that he would definitely die. And although it's his first time in the swamp, he is confident that he can find the right way. Meanwhile, the captain is reprimanded by the president for the advisor still being alive. Sergeant Matthias, who was the disguised prisoner, failed to eliminate the advisor. The captain reassures the president, stating the swamps are impassable. Meanwhile, Christie and Irwin find a small stream of clean water, and the girl washes her face, pondering her misfortune. Suddenly, Irwin asks Christie to freeze, but she thinks he's decided to take advantage of her. However, it turns out Irwin spotted the Pagan, which suddenly emerged from under the ground. Christie grabs a knife and cuts off part of the creature. After that, Christie treats Irwin's wound while sharing that she ended up in prison for standing up to an inspector who tried to force her into intimacy. At that moment, the wolf's group appears from behind the rocks. The man intends to take back the metal box, but Irwin takes the part of the creature cut off by Christie and uses it as an electric whip. The wolf realizes the situation is bad and decides to let them go. The pair leaves, but the wolf stubbornly follows their tracks. Erwin heard that on the rotten shore there's a place where former prisoners live, and the wolf is their leader. He follows them, hoping that the pair will first fall into a swamp trap. Erwin notices the tips of the pagan sticking out of the ground and orders Christy to lie down, be silent, and not move. They do so, watching as a gigantic root of the pagan appears over the wolf's group, dragging several people underground. Meanwhile, the president again contacts the captain, who assures that he has taken the necessary measures and his man is on the trail. In the swamps, Erwin and Christy stop for the night. The man is ready to talk about himself if the girl solves his riddle about the cost of a chocolate bar. But while he states the conditions of the riddle, Christy falls asleep. The girl wakes up to a strange sound and sees a wave of creatures approaching them. She tries to run, but Erwin throws her into the box, climbs in himself, and closes the lid. The pair waits out the invasion, and although the box's lid is eventually breached, the people remain unharmed. Finally, silence falls, and they emerge outside. Christy's first question is about the answer to the riddle, and knowing it, she calms down. Now the box is no longer needed, and the pair throws it away. Soon they reach the liquid part of the swamp. Meanwhile, the remaining part of the wolf's group follows their trail, but Layla, realizing they might lose the couple, runs after Erwin and Christy. The wolf rushes after her and falls into a swamp pit. Here Layla slips up, saying that Erwin is a former presidential advisor and knows best how to act. Nevertheless, one of the prisoners, Jan, helps the wolf out. In the evening, Erwin sets up camp, forces Christy to eat raw tadpoles, and confesses that he was the president's advisor, but his conscience tormented him. He collected a lot of different information and wanted to tell the public about it. The authorities realized they couldn't get rid of him quietly and sent him to the swamps. But he managed to launch a virus into the control system, which can only be turned off knowing the code, and only he has the code. So, after the system's collapse, free people will be able to build their new free city management system. Christy reminds him that then they will definitely be looking for him, but the man is confident that by that time, they will already be on the islands. Meanwhile, in the city, the system begins to collapse. The communications satellites fail first. In the morning, Layla and those who left the wolf encounter wild people on their way. Hearing their screams, Christy curses whoever invented this method of punishment. Erwin admits that he did it because he thought it was humane. Christy breaks down and berates Erwin, urging him to burn himself so no one can learn his code. He starts screaming, calling the savages to fight to die, but no one comes out. Then Christy confesses that she was offered freedom for his death. Meanwhile, the wolf finds those hiding among the rocks of his group. To save herself, Layla tells about the offer she received to kill the advisor, after which a ship will fly for her. The wolf orders to find the sensor on her body. The girl runs away and dies in the web of a dangerous swamp fungus. Seeing that their spy is dead, the captain arms Sergeant Matthias and sends him on the advisor's trail. Meanwhile, another man from the wolf's group dies, and then Jan catches up with the couple, and distracted by him, Erwin falls into a trap to the wolf, who intends to exchange the advisor for freedom. Erwin, tied up, tries to persuade Christy to run, but she suddenly kisses him. The wolf forces Erwin to stand, but he mocks the prisoner, and the wolf has to carry Erwin on his back. Meanwhile, Sergeant Matthias's group lands in the ruins of the old prison where wild criminals live. Soon the wolf's group also gets there. Leaving the tied advisor and Christy aside, the wolf goes to negotiate with the sergeant. But while they are agreeing, Erwin frees himself and escapes. The wolf promises to find him but gets shot by the sergeant, after which Matthias finds Christy and Jan, and killing the latter leads the girl forward. Erwin confronts Matthias and demands to release Christy in exchange for himself. The military agrees but shoots a tranquilizer, hitting Christy, and himself receives a knife in the back from the fatally wounded wolf. Erwin thanks the dying man, who advises not to go to the Paradise Islands because they don't exist. Then he drinks poison to avoid suffering. Later, Erwin, carrying Christy in his arms, reaches the sea, and the advisor realizes that the Paradise Islands are rafts made of plants, and they can cross the strait on them. Meanwhile, the captain loses contact with Matthias and realizes that further search for the advisor is useless, but he sends the last combat drone after him. At this time, Christy comes to her senses and realizes that their island is gradually sinking. The prisoner with them, Job, hears this and goes into the water to save the couple. Soon they hear the sound of an approaching drone, but the drone fails to reach them and falls into the water, thereby proving that Erwin's virus worked and the city's control system is destroyed. Their joy is overshadowed by a cliff appearing ahead. The couple wraps themselves in their plant-made island and miraculously survives a gigantic waterfall. Soon, they reach the shore, where a secret bunker is set up in case of the president's escape, designed and built by Erwin. But he doesn't know the entire code. The last figure was entered by the president. There are only 2 attempts, so guessing it is impossible. Then Christy remembers the riddle about the chocolate bar and, knowing the president's answer to it, which Erwin also posed to him, suggests entering the number he named. And the bunker opens. But then it turns out that the hidden spaceship there is single-seated. Erwin insists that Christy should fly alone, but she refuses because she loves him. In the last scenes of the movie, the voices of Christy and Erwin are heard, making it clear that they somehow managed to squeeze into the spaceship together. Thanks to their rescue, the League of Free Worlds learned the truth about the planet and destroyed the remnants of the total control system. But 10 years later, a new system was established on planet XT-59, much more cruel than the previous one. The movie is simple and at times imperfect, but it's truthful and unexpectedly relevant because no one can bring freedom to the people from the outside. Everything is achieved only through one's own efforts and by taking responsibility for oneself and no one else. Krefeld, 1984. One night, a father awakens his 6-year-old son Mark because they need to flee their now dangerous home. While the man hurries the older son, Thomas, Mark sees a frog statuette that stood on the shelf come to life. The father and sons drive into the night. Suddenly, the boy's mother Petra appears, begging the father not to take the sons as no one is pursuing him. He drives around her and races to the cemetery. 10 years pass. Mark works at the living sound store he opened with his brother and attends school, where he has a bad reputation as his brother was once expelled for aggressive behavior. Besides the boys, a lame kid named Memo works in the store, whom Thomas values for his loyalty. On his younger brother's birthday, Thomas gives him the Chronicle, an ancient book passed down in their family from generation to generation, telling of a parallel world called the Black Tower, full of terrifying creatures serving the Griffin, who wants to subjugate the world of humans. Only the Zimmerman family men can stand against the Griffon and save everyone from his invasion. Mark begins reading, considering it all fantasy, but the descriptions are too realistic, and the map looks genuine. Disturbed by the bloodthirsty drawings, Mark suddenly finds himself in unknown terrain at the base of a huge tower, and immediately a terrible horned creature confronts him. Mark runs and falls into a pit, and as the monster swings an axe at him, the boy screams in fear and finds himself back in his bed. The next day, Mark meets a new student at school, Rebecca, who classmates immediately inform about Mark's family troubles. His brother Thomas was in an asylum for hitting a teacher, and Mark attends psychotherapy sessions, trying to forget the events of one terrible night. But the girl isn't scared off, happily accepting Mark's invitation to the rooftop of the store, which is set up as a picnic area. In the evening, Mark finds Thomas at home, which is rare. Everything goes well until Petra starts a conversation about the asylum she put him in. Then Thomas invites his brother to look at evidence and drives him to the cemetery. They climb to the attic of the church where their ancestors had equipped a shelter. Thomas shows the father's belongings, missing a plumb bob. Here, Mark cuts his finger. His blood hits an inconspicuous peg, and a secret compartment in the floor opens, where the brothers find the tool the Zimmermans can use to kill the Griffin. But the moment Mark takes it in his hands, stone statues at the cemetery come to life, one appearing on the roof, blocking the brothers' way down. Nonetheless, they descend, but a stone devil jumps right in front of their car. A stone angel intervenes to protect the boys, and while the two statues fight, the brothers hide in the church. Waiting out the battle, Mark falls asleep, and in the morning, doesn't find Thomas next to him, but the hood of his car is covered in stone debris. Mark thanks the angel for help and drives to look for his brother. Opening the Chronicle, he hears voices advising to look for Thomas in the Black Tower. Mark goes to Dr. Peters, and it turns out that Becky is the daughter of his psychotherapist. Mark drives to the store, but his brother isn't there either. The boy opens the Chronicles and finds information about a portal located in the church, but then he gets scared by an unknown insect and ends up in a dense forest. Meanwhile, Memo, seeing that the brothers aren't in the store, calls their mother Petra, who immediately rushes to the police and reports the children missing. Mark finds Thomas, who rejoices that his brother has finally seen the truth, but learning that he simply teleported here, he concludes that his brother is a wanderer between worlds. In the morning, Thomas wakes his brother because nearby appear slave hunters. The boys run, but Thomas is wounded and captured, while Mark teleports to the store, terrifying Becky and Memo. Friends ask him to tell them everything, and he finally agrees. Meanwhile, in the Black Tower, one of the horned creatures reports to the master that they caught the Wanderer's brother, and he concludes that it's time for the return. Friends predictably don't believe Mark, and he leads them to the church, but there's no attic above. Becky considers this a cruel joke, as it was dangerous for Memo with his leg to climb up there. Mark gets angry, and the girl, offended, leaves. In rage, Mark hits the stone base of the statue, and these blows resonate in the caves of the Black Tower. At night, Mark goes to Memo because he needs help searching for his brother, and although he considers the boy crazy, he goes with him to the portal in the church. The boys follow the instructions from the book and find a door with signs in the basement. Mark performs the necessary manipulations, and the door opens. Astonished, Memo goes there and immediately notices that his vision has become normal, and his leg no longer hurts. And while the boy rejoices, the passage closes. Memo asks to remember how Mark returned home last time, and he shows how he closed his eyes, thought, and disappears, leaving Memo alone in a strange world. Memo didn't appreciate such a joke. Opening his eyes, Mark is horrified and tries to return for Memo, but it doesn't work. Then Petra enters, sees the chronicles, locks her son in the room, and he falls into a rage, causing the walls of the Black Tower to crumble. Petra calls the doctor, and he asks to release the son. Mark rushes to the church but only finds a note on a piece of wood that Memo is nearby. The boy returns to the store and, taking the necessary items, goes to Becky, where he tells her that Memo stayed in the Black Tower. He leaves her the chronicles and a note asking her to take the book to Petra if they don't return. He goes to the world of the Black Tower and tries to find a friend, while Becky reads the chronicles and ponders the boy's mental health. Mark emerges from the forest and, setting up a sound system on a cliff, plays Memo's favorite music. Meanwhile, the slave hunters capture a village where they seek a man with a loud voice. One of the boys, wishing to save his family, volunteers to become one, and they take him away, while a group of horned creatures goes to the strange sounds in the hills. At the same time, Becky shares Mark's secret with classmates and suggests conducting an experiment to animate a plant from the book. The volunteer is brought to the cave and seated in a stone chair. Now the griffin, wanting to speak, inserts its claw into the boy's back, and he voices its thoughts. While Mark is discovered by horned creatures, the boy runs from them when an unfamiliar man, completely wrapped in rags, covers the boy with smelly fish and hides him in a forest den. Meanwhile, Becky performs the ritual, dripping water on the flower, but young people vainly wait for some manifestations of magic. The flower remains dry. Becky suggests a last attempt at the portal, not noticing how a classmate puts the flower in a glass of water. At the same time, the horned creatures leave, and the stranger helping Mark removes the rag from his face, revealing himself to be Memo. But he's been in this world for 2 weeks, not 2 days. Then the boys see a caravan of slaves, and in one of them, they recognize Thomas. But while they can't help him, they themselves are noticed. The boys run from the pursuers and end up on a high cliff with no way out. On Earth, Mark's classmates come to the church and perform everything prescribed, but the door doesn't open. Then Mark grabs Memo, jumps off the cliff, and teleports to his room. Petra hears a noise in her son's room, runs there, and sees Mark and Memo, who now needs glasses again. Mark calls Becky and asks her to bring the chronicles, while a flower blooms on her desk, from which something terrible emerges. The next day, the boys begin developing a plan to save Thomas, especially since Memo now knows a lot about the world of the Black Tower. He built a hut on the shore of a lake where the caravans of slaves stop, following which one can find the place of the boys' confinement. Meanwhile, the griffin is reported that the wanderer between worlds has escaped, and it destroys its close. And Becky, waking up, finds a blooming flower, miraculously avoiding contact with the creature, and gives the chronicles to her father because she now considers Mark sick. In school, she tells the boy about this, and he experiences another fit of rage. Becky's father, having read the chronicles, goes to Petra and admits that he underestimated her son's illness. The woman decides to hospitalize Mark despite the doctor's protests. Later, the woman detains her son near the house when an ambulance arrives, and paramedics grab the boy, but he resists and runs across the roof to the church, where Memo has long been waiting, but the paramedics come there too. The boys fend them off when suddenly a hooded man comes and scatters the medics, beating one to death. The boys run to the door, while Petra waiting outside sees a bloodied Mark coming out of the church. At that time, Memo leads his friend to his hut by the lake. Meanwhile, the father informs Becky about Mark's deed and forbids her from leaving the house. He himself goes to the crime scene and confirms Mark's capacity for crime. Becky enters her room, turns on music and lies down on the floor. At the same time, a downpour suddenly starts in the Black Tower, and the alarmed Memo shows the scorpions hatching from the flowers upon contact with water. The boys run away. On Earth, Becky is attacked by a similar scorpion that enters her mouth. She manages to pull it out with tongs and destroy it by sprinkling salt. The boys also manage to escape by climbing onto a rock. Morning comes, the scorpions dry out right before their eyes, and Becky rushes to look for the chronicles because she now believes the boy. She takes the book and hurries to Petra. At the same time, the boys reach a lake in the mountains. On Earth, Becky's father comes home, takes off his bloodied clothes and burns them in the yard because it was he who was in Mark's guise in the church and killed the medic. Meanwhile, a faceless wizard arrives at the Griffin, reporting that he did everything to prevent the boy from returning to the human world. And Mark, at this time, admires Memo's cabin and is surprised by the changes in his friend. From the cabin, one can monitor the paths, and the caravan will not pass by unnoticed. But just in case, the boys set up signal cans. Becky comes to Petra, where a detective arrives, who also notes the oddity of what is happening. The girl tells everything she managed to find out about the Zimmerman family, and only then notices that she forgot her backpack with the chronicle and the classmate's car. Mark and Memo spend the evening by the fire, developing a plan. Mark can go to the mines, find Thomas, and teleport home with him. Memo is ready to walk to the portal that Mark will open, but the boy needs to train in teleportation. At this time, the wizard reports the plans of the boys who stopped at the lake. The Griffin orders their capture and reminds that he does not need complications in the human world yet. In the morning, Mark wakes up feeling someone's presence, and going to the shore, hears the screams of a fish, which Memo catches, and guts. Mark remembers how and where he teleported, and begins training. At the same time, a messenger from the Black Tower comes to Dr. Peters's house, telling about Mark's appearance. The doctor is proud of himself because it was he who prepared the boy, invoking the necessary rage in him and cutting off his way to the world of people. After seeing off the guest, the doctor goes to Becky's room and discovers that she has disappeared. He gathers dust in her room and, tasting it, learns about everything she did during the day. Then he goes to a youth party where the girl went to get her backpack back. Meanwhile, Memo expresses the thought that fear is not necessary for teleportation, and Mark remembers the kiss with Becky and teleports to the town. He immediately returns, but it turns out that he was gone for 2 days. The boy finds out that strong emotion and a vision of the place to which one must move are needed for teleportation. At this time, Becky finds her water-soaked backpack in the kitchen, and opening the book, sees a bloomed flower. The girl realizes the threat looming over those present, takes a pack of salt, and goes to track down the monster. In the other world, Mark again hears someone's footsteps and sees his father, who accuses him of his own death. Memo brings him to his senses, but Mark is sure that someone is getting into his head. Meanwhile, Dr. Peters comes to the party when one of the girls is attacked by the monster. Becky rushes for help when her father stops her and, using hypnosis, orders her to leave. Petra and the detective sitting in the hall suddenly see young people flying out of the crowd, then screams are heard, and everyone runs away. And in the middle of the hall remains an incomprehensible creature, resembling a many-legged scorpion. The detective pulls out a gun, but the monster attacks him, knocking the weapon out. And then Petra picks up the pistol and saves the detective. Then the doctor enters the hall and the killed millipede turns into a bear. In the morning, Mark wakes up again from the scream of the fish and, in irritation, argues with Memo. But his box of nails, which he uses to remove anger, turns out to be empty. He runs out to the shore, where Memo teases him and throws the nails into the lake. Then he reminds him of his father, saying that he is to blame for his death. In a rage, Mark hits Memo, thereby collapsing the walls of the Black Tower. The Griffin sends hunters after him. Meanwhile, Memo collects firewood and, returning to the lake, sees Mark hitting another Memo. He touches the body and it suddenly scatters, but the traces in the sand betray the direction of his run. Memo throws a stick and stuns the faceless wizard who disguised himself as Memo. The boys tie him to a cot, and he tries to deceive the guys, alternately taking the forms of their fathers. Only under the threat of fire does the wizard admit that he is Mermaid, a creature capable of recreating thought and showing what people want to see. He did everything at the behest of the griffin because he feeds on Mark's hatred. At that moment, the signal of the caravan's arrival sounds, and in the town they investigate an accident, although no one can understand how the circus bear got out of the cage. The detective asks Petra for a conversation and tells her that after her husband's self-immolation, they did not find a trace of his body. He was taking antidepressants, thanks to which he was able to see the true face of the prosecutor. And it was not human. The case was slowed down, and today they both saw a monster, not a bear. So, they need to look for the chronicles. At the same time, the doctor brings Becky to her senses and she remembers the story about the Mermaids who served the griffin, to which her father reacts very aggressively, which makes the girl suspicious. The doctor locks her up. Mark and Memo follow the trail of the Horned squad to the mine, where people work. The commander of the Horned reports to the mine overseer about the failure of their mission and receives an order to process the tunnels with tar mud. Mark, to find Thomas, turns on the music system. The brother raises his hand, but the Horned ones immediately take him into the mine. Mark suggests waiting for darkness. At night the boys say goodbye, and Mark teleports while Memo distracts the guard. The boy finds his brother, but it turns out that the tar prevents teleportation. Thomas admits that he was used as bait. They even left him a plumb line. This means that the griffin is ready to attack the human world, using Mark's power. At the same time, Memo runs to the portal, leading away the Horned squad, while the brothers argue about who will fight the griffin. Mark shows his superiority by breaking through the cave wall with a plumb line. The brothers run away, and Memo falls into an ambush and loses fingers on his hand. Mark and Thomas catch up with the squad, and, having killed one of the Horned ones, find the injured Memo. Learning about the escape of the Wanderer, the griffin emerges from his hiding place and flies in the footsteps of the people who at that time are driving to the portal in a captured cart. But at the very door, Thomas suddenly demands that Mark give him the plumb line. He refuses, and Thomas forcibly takes it, and then the griffin appears above them. At this time, the detective and Petra take Becky out of the house, ignoring her father's protests. Mark comes to his senses and hears Thomas's voice from the mist, picks up the plumb line he threw, and realizes that his brother was captured by the griffin. At that time, Petra, the detective, and Becky are trying to open the portal. And the griffin calls Mark to battle, fueling his hatred. But the boy suddenly remembers his father's advice, calms down, and refuses to fight while Petra opens the portal. Becky manages to pick up Memo when Mark sees the enraged griffin and wounds him with a plumb line, forcing him to drop Thomas. The boys drag him into the passage and close the door in the monster's face. Meanwhile, a Mermaid in the guise of Dr. Peters kills another Mermaid who will now work on Earth instead of him. It turns out that Dr. Peters is a Mermaid in human form, and in the church, he killed the medic while in the guise of Mark, so that the police would look for the boy and he could not return to the world of people. Sometime later, Petra comes to her sons in the hospital and asks for forgiveness for mistrust, but now she has seen everything herself and, together with the detective, is ready to support them. Mark thanks Memo for everything, goes to Becky, and, having kissed her, teleports her to the lakeshore, while new Horned ones are born from stones in the cave. An entertaining adventure series, quite decently filmed by German cinematographers. And judging by the finale, there will be a second season too. At the beginning of the movie, we see an experienced fisherman heading out to sea. Like thousands of times before, he casts his net from the boat, but something goes wrong and the net gets caught on something on the ocean floor. The fisherman dives down, but he can't make it back to the surface as a huge school of fish surrounds him. Charlie, a lighthouse keeper, calls her colleagues in Germany to discuss current affairs. She's interrupted by a signal on her monitor and rushes off to investigate. Charlie has to swim to the duty boy to dive into the water and retrieve a sensor that somehow got tangled up in fishing nets. Strange things are also happening in Canada. Leon, a young whale researcher, is called to Vancouver's City Beach, where a giant killer whale washed up a couple of hours ago. After examining the animal, he heads to the fishing dock to find out who among the poachers caused serious cuts to the killer whale. An old fisherman takes Leon to his boat and shows him the bitten side of the vessel which was used to try and overturn the killer whale. Leon doesn't believe this story, but the man is sure that the fisherman wouldn't lie to him and that they had to destroy the whale to save themselves. Charlie and her new friend launch a repaired sensor into the ocean, tasked with tracking marine animal population. They notice methane ice fragments around the boat, which often rise to the surface, but today there are too many of them. Leon finally hears the whales and learns that they have been seen in various locations along the coast. Before heading out to sea, he calls his girlfriend Lizzie, who has already taken tourists on her boat to see killer whales in the wild. A giant whale appears next to Leon's boat. After freezing for a couple of minutes, the giant disappears underwater, but a whole pod of orcas takes its place. Lizzie takes the tourists onto the deck and everyone watches in awe as the whales appear. The humpback giant also appears next to the ship and the tourists are able to see it up close. The strange behavior of the whale pleases everyone except Leon, who tries to warn his friend but is too late. The next trick of the whale hits the metal of the boat. Leon arrives at the scene of the accident and tries to save those who survived the hit, but now a pod of orcas is hunting for the tourists. Leon is unable to save Lizzie. The action shifts to a French restaurant. After gathering fresh seafood at the market, the chef plans to prepare lobsters, but one of them shoots an unknown liquid into the man's face. After wiping his face, the chef continues working, but by evening he and two other cooks begin to feel ill. The chef passes away that same evening and the two young cooks are taken to the ICU, waiting for the test results to determine what happened. At the same time, a Norwegian ship in the sea lowers a camera to study an unusual phenomenon, an invasion of ice worms. A few specimens are brought to the surface for study, and the scientist finds a new peculiarity. These creatures have jaws and reproduce several times faster. A commission is formed and everyone agrees that they have discovered a new species of worms and bacteria. Leon talks to the owner of a fishing boat who was also a witness to the humpback whales attacking other boats the day before. In addition, Leon is shown another anomaly. The bottom of the ship that returned from the sea is covered with a thick layer of mollusks which has never been seen before. A group of scientists launches a sampler onto the seafloor to check the soil where worms were found, but due to a methane leak, an explosion occurs. The ship manages to survive, but the team is greatly frightened. The scientists are not only scared of the mistake during the operation, but also the results of the test. In addition to the worms on the seafloor, there are bacteria that eat ice and can reach the very bottom. Jess records a video message to Charlie when something strange suddenly happens and alarming readings appear on the monitors. The water under the ship starts boiling and something pulls it down into the depths. The action shifts to Venice. A young man in love reads poetry on a bridge when suddenly the book falls from his hands and ends up in the canal. The couple immediately forgets about the poetry book because before their eyes is an even stranger sight. Thousands of giant jellyfish rise to the surface. Analysis of the bacteria from the infected chef reveals a new strain that feeds on blood cells. It turns out that several more people have died after visiting the restaurant on the coast. Leon requests permission to perform an autopsy on the killer whale to find out how pollution affects whales and whether this could be related to changes in the behavior of these giants. There is nothing inside the whale that could scare the experts, but Leon finds an unknown substance in its brain, which is sent for analysis. Another victim of infection appears, a young man from a car wash. By putting together all the events, the scientists understand that the bacteria spread from the restaurant through the water supply system. Leon is informed of new cases of whale attacks. Looking at the map, the guy finds a pattern. All the changes occur with the whales during migration. To verify his suspicions, the guy sails to the place where the whales are resting during their sleep. The dive almost ends in tragedy, but Leon manages to install a camera on one of the whales and get out. Sigurd finds out that the Japanese have also found the worms, but they are not in a hurry to report it to the world. Recordings from the cameras are checked in 2 laboratories at once. Leon's footage shows that the whale pod descended to the very bottom, where they were met with strange glowing. Far from the events, a new incident occurs on the coast. Hordes of crabs crawl out onto the streets of a small village. Another shot of the seabed finally lifts the veil of mystery. It turns out that one of the oil and gas companies was drilling ice in a forbidden place and damaged the seabed for several kilometers. Leon has to sneak through a fence to get to the guarded port area to collect a few more mussels for analysis from the ship, but he's caught by security and arrested. In the morning, Mr. Sato, the Japanese owner of the ship, contacts Leon. He asks the guy not to trespass on his territory in this way again, but promises to provide access to all materials for study. Charlie only now receives the message recorded by Jess a few minutes before the tragedy. When the emotions subside, the girl manages to notice some peculiarities on the recording. For example, a glow behind a porthole. Crabs are being delivered to the laboratory, which have started to emerge on the surface in different parts of the world. As expected, they too are filled with a strange substance that absorbs blood cells at an incredible speed. Charlie is reviewing the video repeatedly, not understanding what else is wrong with it. Finally, the girl's hearing catches a sound that is very similar to the sound from the deep-sea recording. The girl contacts the laboratory and shows them a part of the recording that caught her attention, but her stern boss, Katerina, rejects all the scientists' ideas, considering the sound on different recordings to be just random noise. She orders Charlie to finish up the work and shut down the station for the winter without coming up with incredible theories. But after cooling down and carefully considering Charlie's words, Katerina still decides to test this hypothesis, and a helicopter with a group of scientists and a deep water device arrives on the island. The device is delivered to the island by Sigor, and after handing it over to Charlie, he's about to leave. But at the same time, emergency messages come to the scientists on the mainland. They are only able to reach Sigor and inform him that a terrifying tsunami is approaching the coast. Those who see it with their own eyes realize that there is no chance of survival. Sigor manages to warn Charlie and they leave. At the conference, scientists give a report that the discovered bacteria intentionally infect humans, and soon everyone will have to flee far away from water sources. Leon tries to warn his fisherman friends about this, but none of them are ready to live on land, choosing to die in their familiar environment. Rahim meets Leon at the institute to participate in a scientific conference. The best minds gather to discuss what is happening, and most agree that there is some force at work that wants to drive people out of the ocean. Only Katerina is against everyone else. She refuses to abandon the knowledge and convictions gained through years of experience, so she orders the group to seek a logical explanation based on science. Despite objections from their mentor, the group of scientists presents their theory to the public, convincing the government that marine inhabitants infected with bacteria are intentionally attacking humans. They even give the new intelligence a name, the However, such a version only elicits irony from top officials, who also suggest finding more scientific solutions to a problem than negotiating with an unknown intelligence. Astrophysicist Samantha Grove comes to the scientists' aid. Unlike politicians, she carefully studied the report and agrees that the strange sound on different recordings has all the characteristics of an unfamiliar world language. In addition, her team managed to capture the exact same signal from Antarctica. Another influential person, Japanese Mifuno, also believes in Sigor's theory and agrees to finance his venture, hoping it will help to save the world. Sigor assembles the team and informs them of the start of the mission. He suggests everyone think carefully and assess the risks, and those willing to go all the way will be waiting for an expedition to the Arctic in 48 hours. The scientists go home to say goodbye to their loved ones and warn them of their departure. The relatives of many try to persuade them to stay, but everyone understands that this is their last chance to fix something. According to scientists' calculations, the largest accumulation of intelligent bacteria is located in one of the valleys in Antarctica, where they could have lived for millions of years prior. The company is preparing to establish contact, and everyone is playing their role while giving interviews to a young journalist. Finally, the equipment on the ship starts buzzing with interference, and the scientists prepare to capture a signal from the mysterious organism. Sarah, Mifuno's assistant, sits down next to Leon at the table and confesses to him that she would have never believed in their theory if it weren't for her boss, who has proven over many years that his intuition never fails. Samantha is devising a plan. She intends to add a sound of a human child scream to the organism's audio signal and return the recording to the intelligence to show that they are ready to communicate. Charlie asks her colleague to take her with him in the diving apparatus to the bottom. The ship drops anchor and the scientists begin transmitting the sound message. Meanwhile, the daring couple gets into the capsule and prepares to dive to the depths. The whole team is eagerly awaiting any reaction, and finally movement appears on the radar and the sensors pick up a sound signal. The team from the capsule tries to contact the captain's bridge to report that their fans are malfunctioning and they are running out of oxygen, but communication is not working. The chief pilot Luther is ready to return, but Charlie notices some movement and turns off the lights, waiting to see what happens next. On the ship, they also notice something approaching. Sigor insists that the captain recall the submarine, but they can't reach the group. Luther doesn't want to risk anymore and he lifts the boat. On the ship, a hatch opens to receive the capsule into a special compartment. Charlie notices a strange glow appearing around them at that moment, but she doesn't tell anyone about it. Meanwhile, Samantha reports that they have managed to establish contact. The sound signal has returned and the child's cry has been altered as a sign that the bacteria understood the message from humans. Dr. Chase is looking for a way to cure those who have already been infected by the bacteria. Luther tells the journalist that he saw nothing at the depth, and everything Charlie saw was probably a figment of her imagination, just like the whole idea of intelligence. Nevertheless, Samantha tries to decipher the messages to assemble them into a response signal that the intelligence will understand. While staying in the compartment with the capsule, the journalist notices a glow in the pool. The lights on the ship go out and interference begins. When everything is restored, the captain sees the journalist's body fallen on the monitor. Chase tries to save the girl, and on her lips she notices a liquid resembling cerebrospinal fluid. Samantha tells the team and the captain that during the voltage surge there was a signal surge and it was so low that no one heard it. But most importantly, in the opinion of the astrophysicist, it originated from inside the ship. Charlie listens to what her colleagues are saying, but she never musters the courage to tell them that they brought the bacteria into the pool. Leon visits the girl, whose body has become covered in strange spots. The doctor asks the guy and Sarah for help. They must hold the girl while she takes a sample of the spinal fluid for analysis. The doctor tells the team about the results of the analysis. The substance previously found in marine creatures was discovered in Alicia's spinal cord. Chase believes that bacteria were attempting to merge with the girl's cells, and Charlie admits to seeing the glowing enter the ship with them. Samantha records a new message for the this time including an audio image from the astrophysicist. Charlie goes down to the sealed compartment without permission, and the pool starts glowing again, creating unusual shapes with the light. At that moment, Samantha receives a response message from the entity, which also contains an image. Mr. Mifuno's helicopter lands on the ship as he wants to be present for the opening. Sigor shows him the recording from the pool cameras and the image sent in response to Samantha's message. According to the astrophysicist, they have an image of the super ocean that surrounded a supercontinent millions of years ago. According to the scientists, the reminded them that they were, are, and will be on Earth much longer than humans, and all they want is for the oceans to be left alone and not destroyed. But there is good news. Since the entity is responding to messages, the team has a chance to negotiate and reach a ceasefire. In the meantime, Chase devises a drug that can destroy bacteria that consume blood cells. This news creates disagreement within the team. Mifuno plans to test the substance in the pool and if it works, completely destroy the Sigor disagrees with this, at least until they confirm that they cannot negotiate with the Chase tries to take the middle ground and suggests trying the drug in the pool but not rushing to launch it into the open ocean. Everyone gathers to watch the experiment. Chase launches the drug into the water, which immediately begins to rise, emitting a terrible scream that shatters the glass. The captain is informed that nothing is working on the ship and they are simply drifting in the waters of Antarctica. But worse, the ship is surrounded by icebergs. The vessel collides with an iceberg, but unexpectedly a blue glow takes it somewhere else. The captain orders the engines to be started to break free from the control of the He also doesn't understand why they don't pour all the drug they have on board into the water. But Sigurd tries to explain to the captain that everything that happened now is the price for his thoughtless experiment in the pool, and no one in the world will manufacture enough of the substance to destroy worldwide. The only way out is to make a truce. While the team is deciding how to negotiate with the entity traps the ship between the icebergs. Charlie hurries to the capsule to descend and deliver Luther's body to as a sign of complete obedience. Once at depth, Charlie changes her plan. She injects leukocytes into her heart that can merge with and opens the capsule door. The body falls under the control of and the icebergs release the ship, while billions of lights envelop the girl underwater. Later, Charlie brings the ship to a deserted island. It opens its eyes and looks at the sky with glowing blue eyes. The series ends here. Please write in the comments what you think about this series. Spiderhead is an ultra-modern prison that resembles more of a hotel.
This is science, Jeff. We're making the world a better place.
In this facility, inmates live under a more relaxed regime, have the right to take walks, interact with each other, and have the opportunity to reduce their sentences and receive bonuses. But it all comes at a price. Spiderhead carries out medical trials, and not all of them are harmless. To be fair, it must be said that all experiments are voluntary, and each inmate has the right to refuse and return to a standard cell in another prison. Ray, one of the inmates, sits in a chair in front of a mirrored window, and Steve announces the start of the experiment by injecting a substance into Ray's bloodstream. Just a minute later, they administered the first dose of the drug to the subject and begin reciting simple jokes, causing Ray to burst into hysterical laughter. When the jokes are replaced by grim facts, the subject's reaction remains the same. Ray continues to laugh hysterically. Another morning in Spiderhead is no different from the previous ones. Inmates are awakened by a loudspeaker and their names immediately announced for participation in the experiments. Steve inquires of Jeff if he's willing to try the new N40 compound on himself, which no one has ever tried before, and the guy readily agrees to participate in the experiment. In addition to the test drug, another one is administered to enhance the speech centers of the brain. This allows Jeff to describe his state in great detail, mentioning the smallest details. Returning to the Spiderhead compound, Jeff meets Lizzie and tells her about his walk today. Unfortunately, he can't recount everything he saw because after taking the substance that enhances vocabulary, a side effect occurs. Jeff can't say even a few words. The only thing the guy remembers is that everything that surrounded him during the experiment, whether it was flowers or factory pipes, elicited the strongest feelings of love and admiration in him. In the evening, while sitting in bed, Jeff recalls how he ended up in prison. He and his friend decided to go for a joyride at the party, and the intoxicated Jeff took the wheel. The next day, the N40 trials, now called Cupid, continue, but this time Jeff is not alone. Heather, a bold girl who changes her mind about her partner after just a few seconds of drug administration, is invited to join him. The couple's conversation lasts only a few seconds before they cannot resist and engage in intimacy. They don't care that they're being observed and filmed, as the substance completely disconnects their minds from their internal barriers. The process concludes with the young people confessing their love for each other, which delights Steve, and he instructs his partner Mark to closely monitor the subjects to see how they behave when the effects of the substance wear off. The couple feels awkward after what happened and tries not to talk to anyone about it. Jeff continues to spend his free time with Lizzie, not telling her about what happened during the experiments, and he avoids encounters with Heather. The next day, they administered the same Cupid to Jeff, but this time in a double dose, and instead of Heather, an older woman is in the room, whom sober Jeff looks at with disgust. However, as soon as the substance enters his bloodstream, he engages in love with her. After this experiment, Jeff asks Mark to remove him from the kitchen where they work together with Lizzie because he feels uncomfortable continuing to interact with his girlfriend. Steve brings Jeff into the laboratory, but this time he is on the other side of the glass. Steve shows Jeff that both of his previous partners are in the experiment room. The supervisor offers Jeff the choice of which girl he is willing to administer the substance that induces intense fear and pain to, but Jeff cannot choose. He is indifferent to both of the girls and he cannot wish harm upon them. In the end, they simply release the girls, canceling the experiment. Having the right to another Friday walk, Jeff calls his girlfriend who was with him on the night of the accident, but once again he only gets the voicemail. In the evening, Jeff spends time with Lizzie, arranging a small Christmas surprise for her. When Jeff finds himself in the familiar chair in the laboratory, he sees Rogan in front of him, a massive inmate covered in tattoos. Jeff recalls everything that happened with the girls in the previous days and refuses the experiment. Nothing happens, and the men are simply released after a couple of minutes of silence. Jeff realizes what has just occurred. He and Rogan were partners with one of the female inmates, and she was supposed to choose which one of them would receive meds. Bursting into Steve's office, Jeff confirms his suspicions upon seeing Heather there. Furthermore, the doctor does not even argue with the inmate. On the contrary, he shows him a diagram of who is supposed to get close to whom under the influence of the drug. In response to Jeff's complaints, Steve reminds him that being in Spiderhead is a privilege, and if he is not satisfied, he can transfer to a regular prison, albeit without hope of early release. Understanding the hint, the next time Jeff sits calmly in the same room as Rogan without any hysterics. Steve sends Mark on a weekend break, advising his friend to enjoy his time on the mainland. Steve himself decides to take the Cupid to experience the ecstasy he had only seen in his subjects before. The experiments continue, and Steve warns Jeff that they will have to administer dark influx to the girls, as a certain committee demands the purity of the experiment. Jeff tries to explain that he does not wish for anyone to experience the effects of this substance regardless of his feelings for the girls. However, Steve remains adamant and reminds Jeff of all the privileges that he enjoys by cooperating with them. Not wanting to go back to a regular prison, Jeff agrees to administer dark influx to Heather. Heather begins to cry and panic, but the management calmly records the data, listening to Jeff's comments, which did not contain any hint of romantic feelings. The experiment's goal is achieved and Steve plans to conclude it, but an error occurs and Heather goes out of control. She gets hold of a sharp object and frees herself from the torment caused by the dark influx. While Steve and Mark are busy with Heather, Jeff notices the lost keys belonging to the supervisor and finds a notebook with records of upcoming experiments and a lottery ticket with the same numbers as the names of the meds being administered. Seeing that Steve is no longer behind the glass, Jeff manages to lock the safe and toss the keys back so that the doctor does not realize that his secret is exposed. Steve warns Mark that if anyone finds out about what happened to Heather and he has to answer for it, he will drag everyone who participated in the experiment down with him. Lizzie participates in the experiments for the first time, and the first thing they administer to her is dark influx. After experiencing it, she meets with Jeff in a secluded place and shares her feelings with him. Lizzie confesses that she's not sure if Spiderhead is better than a regular prison with the strictest regime. In turn, Jeff also opens up to his girlfriend and confesses that on the night of the accident there was not only his friend in the car but also his beloved girlfriend who did not survive the ride. That's why he willingly undergoes the trials on himself, hoping to somehow atone for his guilt. The candid conversation between the two of them leads to them spending the night together. Steve quickly deduces the close relationship between his wards and decides to use this connection for his own purposes. When Jeff arrives for the next experiment, he learns that today he must either agree to administer dark influx to Lizzie or leave Spiderhead. Jeff refuses, but the doctor gives him a chance to postpone the experiment until the morning. When he meets the defiant young man again, he is armed with Lizzie's personal file. It turns out that the crime for which the girl is serving time is so terrifying for her that no amount of dark influx can make it worse. Steve watches with pleasure as Jeff adjusts the dosage scale to the maximum. However, it quickly becomes apparent to him that Jeff intends to experiment on him, not on his girlfriend. Mark, realizing that he has also fallen into Steve's trap with the inmates, decides to rectify the situation and hands the remote control to Jeff. The inmate receives all the necessary information from Steve and persuades him to open the main exit so that he and Lizzie can leave the prison. But the manager grabs the remote control and administers the maximum dose of dark influx to the girl, causing her intense suffering. He then smashes his cell phone to prevent anyone from canceling his command. The couple manages to free themselves from the effects of the meds and run out of the laboratory. At the same time, Steve announces over the loudspeaker that because of the fugitives, everyone else will be sent back to prisons where their comfortable lives will come to an end. Jeff and Lizzie become the targets of a manhunt. Dozens of hardened criminals, including the massive tattooed Rogan, plan to deal with the couple who deprived them of all the privileges of the facility. Steve tries to escape with the meds because police boats called by Mark are about to approach Spiderhead. Steve manages to leave the base and take off in a small plane before the police arrive. But since his remote control is shattered, meds are injected into his bloodstream in massive quantities. Another release of Cupid induces admiration, and the man steers the plane towards a tiny rocky island, seeing it as a paradise. Mark, on the police boat, watches as his former boss circles above the sea and then crashes into the rocks. Jeff and Lizzie hijack a boat and manage to sail away before the police arrive. Happy and free, the young couple regrets only that Steve did not invent a substance that could induce self-forgiveness. And that's how the movie ends. There comes a time when humanity is faced with weather disasters and global wars that are slowly destroying people. And technology emerges that people use not to save an uncertain tomorrow, but to return to the bright memories and emotions of yesterday. Nick Bannister goes to work where he is met by his assistant Emily Sanders, nicknamed Watts, who informs him that the fellow soldier is waiting for him. The man lost both legs in the recent global war and comes to Nick to take advantage of technology that allows him to return to a bright past left only in his memories. After all, few people dream of the future now because cities have flooded and wars have engulfed the world. The tank was originally a tool for interrogation and then became a means to relive the best moments of life all over again. Nick immerses the man in a time when he was healthy and cheerful, playing with his dog on the lawn of his father's house. When he comes to his senses, the man tries to pay Watts off with a new synthetic substance, Baka, but Nick provides his co-worker his services for free because their establishment is a success. Who wouldn't want to visit the past and see their dear and close people and relive the best moments of life? But there are those who abuse the memories. One such person is Elsa, who comes almost daily to relive a night of love with a dear one. But one day a woman comes into the establishment who has lost her keys on her way home. The woman introduces herself as May and immediately attracts Nick's attention. She is immersed in her memories, and Nick looks at the customer's day, the wake-up call, breakfast, and the keys May puts in her bag. She drives to work, to the club, and drops her keys under the makeup table. Watts wants to stop the memories, but for some reason Nick asks her to keep going. He sees a woman crying before going on stage, but picks himself up and goes to the microphone. He listens mesmerized to her voice, then turns off the equipment. After she leaves, Watts discovers May's forgotten earrings and gives them to Nick. As the sun rises, flooded Miami turns into a ghost town. It is so hot during the day that people had begun to live at night. The fighting at the borders ended long ago, but passions still boil inside the cities, and riots occur more and more often. And prosecutors often turn to Nick for help because his equipment can be used to peer into the moments of crime. Today's client is a tycoon accused of starting a fire in one of the buildings, and his lawyers are seeking a ban on a cession of capacity. And the prosecutor's office can do nothing, even though the city is mired in problems, murders, and corruption. During the war, such tycoons bought up dry land for next to nothing, and the settlers had to survive as best as they could. The day would come when the ocean would take everything, but for now the flooded city could still be home. Nick comes to the club and finds May. He gives her the earrings and asks her why she cried before the show. The woman confesses that she always gets nervous before she goes on stage, and offers to walk her out. A close relationship develops between May and Nick, but one day the woman disappears without a trace. Watts worries about her partner, who begins to constantly delve into his memories to figure out where and how to find May. The colleague tries to get the man to come back to his life as their business begins to crack at the seams. New technologies emerging, clients are leaving. Even Elsa has disappeared somewhere and doesn't come for weeks, and he spends every day in the tank remembering May. He tries to forget her, but she won't come out of his mind. One day he remembers sharing with her his terrible memories of people dying in the surging waves, and she sympathized and understood him. He goes around places where he might have known something about May, but he gets the impression that the woman never existed. And the more truth he learns about his beloved, the more he doubts that he ever knew her at all. He goes back again and again to the time when they were together. Once he noticed bruises on her arm, but she excused herself by working hard in high heels. He had told her about the war and the trenches and only now knows what true happiness is. One day he is roused from his dive by someone's insistent knocking, but while he's getting out of the tank there is no one at the front door. Suddenly he sees something shiny under the water and picks up May's earring. Watts can't believe that the woman lost the jewelry today. Apparently it's been lying under the door for a long time. And now they need to get busy because they've been summoned to interrogate a dealer named Holes who worked for Joe, the biggest supplier of vodka. The criminal is submerged in the tank and finds himself in a bar room, in the middle of which stands the chair of the chief mafioso of Orleans, St. Joe. Suddenly, a familiar voice is heard, and Nick sees May. She sings for Joe, and he notices the woman. The events took place over 5 years ago, and despite Watt's objections, Nick asks to show the memories next. May is introduced to Joe, and he offers her vodka. May refuses, which enrages Holes, but Joe offers to apologize to the woman, and Joe's underling aims a gun at him. He apologizes, and Joe treats May to vodka again, and this time she agrees. At this moment, one of the police officers, losing his patience, pushes Nick away and asks Holes the main questions, but the bandit's brain shuts down, and the officers ask Nick to bring the criminal's mind back. Nick again asks to see May, and a scene emerges where the girl reminds him of what she once was, poor but clean and conscientious, but then she tried vodka and lost herself. Holes has no time to listen to her outpourings because Joe is waiting for him with the goods, but it's not in the safe because May has robbed her master. The last thing Holes remembers is May hitting him over the head. Watts is astonished. Didn't Nick know that his beloved was using substances? But he never noticed this weakness of hers, but now he knows where to find her. Nick goes to New Orleans, tormented by the thought that he didn't know the woman he loved at all. He comes to Joe, but he's greeted with distrust because he reeks of the military from a mile away. And Joe was once the one who was left to die in the tide by the military. He gives an order to drown Nick in the fish tank until he tells him the real reason for his visit. Nick confesses that he is looking for May, but this causes the merchant to laugh. Is it all because of this woman? He knows what she took from him, substances and money, but what did she want with Nick? The conversation with the bandit might have ended badly if Watts hadn't come to the rescue. A first-rate marksman, she quickly incapacitated Joe's fighters, shooting the mobster's favorite aquarium in the process. Nick struggles with his jailer, and as he prepares to engage in a firefight, it turns out that Watts has already dealt with everyone and mortally wounded Joe. By the request of the wounded man, the woman finishes him off, and the pair leave. But now Nick agonizes over the question, why did May come to him? He recalls telling her about the plates on which memories were recorded, and May shared one of them. When London flooded, she swam to Miami. But she didn't have a place to stay, so she somehow fell asleep on the boat. Someone untied her and the woman was swept out into the ocean. She would have died if she hadn't stumbled upon a lonely white house in the middle of the water not far from Florida Keys. The woman who lived there put her back on her feet, and it was the best thing that ever happened to her. And Nick had the memory of a song his grandfather sang, and he sang it for May. Nick plunges back into his memories again and again to figure out what the con artist stole. Watts can't understand his obsession. What does he have that May went to imitate a relationship for? Watts recalls May's last visit. At the time, the woman offered her alcohol because she wanted to fix the relationship. She saw that she didn't like her colleague Nick and candidly admits that she was addicted. To this, Watts admits that she worked in supply after the war. She needed to feed her daughter, so she went to soldier drones for the army. The woman then abused and once caused a fire. Her daughter was taken away by the relatives and Watts went back to the bottle. But thanks to Nick, she didn't drown in it. Feeling bad, Watts went to the bathroom, leaving May alone in the room. And she took advantage of this and broke into the vault using the access code, Nick's grandfather's tune. And that means the woman has been studying it hard and has been preparing for a robbery for a long time. They look through their file cabinet and discover Elsa's memories are missing. Nick goes looking for the woman and learns from her friend that Elsa was murdered and her baby boy is missing without a trace. The red-headed friend who took the boy was with the killer. Nick is increasingly plagued by the question, who was May really? A con artist, an addict, a murderer. Nick checks all the clues that might lead to May, and one day he is attacked by a man who, after beating him, advises him to forget about May as she did. Then he calls someone with the message that Nick won't bother them anymore. Watts manages to identify the attacker, a corrupt cop from Joe's entourage. They go to the prosecutor's office, but on the way they witness a disturbance. The land tycoon is dead, and the people who had hoped for relief learn that everything goes to the rich man's wife and son, and they have no intention of changing his policies. It turned out that Nick was acquainted with the rich man's wife, and seeing her reminded him of a clue that had long plagued his subconscious. The man from Elsa's memories was none other than the tycoon, and Watts finds data on the policeman named Booth who worked for the tycoon. Nick recognized him because the rich man's wife Tamara had once approached Nick as well, and then the rich man said the same words that Elsa had later said. It turns out that Rich wanted to get rid of the bastard child and hired Booth to do it, but it's going to be damn hard to prove. Nevertheless, Nick is determined to do it because May used him. He goes to visit the tycoon's widow who, like other rich people, lived on property protected by a dam. Nick is greeted by the butler and, without letting him explain who he is, hands him the hat and jacket that all the men in the house wear. Puzzled, Nick walks into a room styled like the store where Tamara once met her fiancé. He realizes that Tamara has lost her mind and everything around her is rigged for her reality. Nevertheless, he tries to talk to her and asks her to tell him where Booth is. Then he opens the mirrors and the woman, seeing her reflection, comes to her senses for a moment. She knows that her husband ordered her to kill her former mistress and child because he did not want to share the inheritance. At this moment, Tamara's son arrives and Nick is thrown out, and he avoids death only because the butler was also ex-military. After remembering Tamara's reservation about human scum, Nick goes down to the old factory where those who have no place in society gather. Seeing a woman who looks like May, he follows her and finds Booth, who taunts him. He and May are people from another world and he will never find her. Booth jumps out the window and Nick runs after him. They meet on the roof and start a fight, but Booth jumps over to the next building. Nick repeats the trick and catches the bandit. They fight again until they end up in a flooded music room. And then Booth, along with the piano, falls through a hole in the floor and sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Nick dives after him and frees him from the piano, but Booth hits him and Nick begins to sink while the bandit floats up. Nick sees May and hears her voice. Immediately he finds the strength and swims out to grab Booth, who was not expecting it. He plunges him into the tank, intending to find out the whole truth. He sees how Booth and May met in Miami. It was then that he hired the woman to find Elsa's memories. May met his army friend and the latter, over vodka, spilled everything he knew about Nick. He even whistled his friend's favorite song. It turns out that the woman knew and had everything in mind. All this time Nick was just a target. But in an instant flashback he suddenly discovers that May was resisting her because she was genuinely attracted to Nick. That's when the bruise on her arm appeared. And after she brought Elsa's memory tapes, Booth confessed that he intended to get rid of the woman and her son. That's when Booth killed Elsa, but May managed to intercept the boy and put him on the boat. She rescued the child and escaped from the murderer. May then went to Nick's house, knocking on the door, but she was already waiting for Booth, who promised to kill Nick if she did not go with him. That's when May dropped the earring, hoping Nick would find it. In the next flashback, Booth tries to get May to confess where she took the baby, and she suddenly talks about the house amidst the ocean. Nick realizes that this is a message for him. He steps into the illusion and May confesses her love for him while kissing Booth. Then, after pushing the bandit away, May swallows a handful of vodka and leaps from a height. Enraged, Nick retaliates against Booth in the most brutal way possible, by frying his brain with his most nightmarish memories of being burned alive on Joe's orders. Nick goes to the tycoon's house. He realizes who really killed Elsa. The rich man's son didn't want to share his inheritance, and he was the one who hired Booth. And Nick has all the proof. He was the one Booth called at the time, and it can be confirmed. The guy tries to pay him off, but Nick says his brother is alive, and the police have already found him in a cabin in the middle of the ocean, and they are coming for the killer soon. The guy pulls out a gun but hesitates to shoot and tries to kill himself. But he doesn't have the guts to do it either. Nick goes to Watts, who now works at the hospital, and confesses to killing Booth. He hands over the records of Elsa and May's murders and asks that it be given to the prosecutor's office. He regrets missing out on many good things and asks Watts to find his daughter and be with her. The news of the tycoon's son's crime was the last drop that overflowed the cup of people's patience, and a riot broke out in the town. But Nick withdrew from it all into memories, reliving again and again the happy moments of meeting May. Now elderly Watts and her granddaughter often come to his receptacle, while Nick tells May the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. The idea of the film makes us think that people are very different. Some deal with a bad present and an uncertain future and may not dwell on memories, while others need to constantly look back to the past in order to exist in the present. Mid-21st century, after conquering the moon, people desired more, and Mars became the new goal. The first ever manned flight to the Red Planet is underway, led by experienced astronaut Alexander Shapaev. Although the flight itself is successful, upon entering Mars's atmosphere, the landing module is hit by a meteor shower, causing it to encounter a sandstorm. Back on Earth, the head of Central Flight Control, Kovalev, orders Shapaev to take manual control of the module, but this fails to rectify the critical situation. Then, Kovalev commands the activation of the return program and the detachment of the small module from the main ship. However, the equipment fails. Shapaev manually detaches the module, saving the main crew. His colleagues can now return to Earth, but this astronaut cannot. Kovalev is deeply affected by the incident, while his interview about the upcoming Mars mission plays on TV, not foreseeing the tragic outcome. Once, Kovalev and Shapaev dreamed of flying to the Red Planet, but Kovalev never imagined his best friend paying with his life for it. Now, as the flight director, he must inform the world of the disaster. Kovalev steps out to address the gathered journalists. Meanwhile, on Mars, it turns out that although the module is severely damaged, the astronaut is alive. Shapaev establishes communication just as Kovalev announces the astronaut's death on television and his heroic act of saving the main ship and crew. Upon learning this, Kovalev rushes to the communication screen, overjoyed to see his friend alive and well. Later, he begins calculating rescue options and asks Minister Rogachev to expedite the next expedition, which could save Shapaev. The minister is horrified by the impending costs. At the same time, a popular TV host reports the Mars disaster to the president of the television corporation, suggesting a show about space dogs instead of a hopeless report on the man stranded on Mars. However, the president advises delving into this topic and calls Kovalev to propose creating a show with his astronaut. A live broadcast from another planet is sensational. Kovalev is outraged by his cynicism as a man is left utterly alone millions of kilometers from his home planet with little hope for rescue. But the corporation president explains that all funds raised will go towards rescuing astronaut Shapaev, showing the world that people do not abandon their own. Kovalev retreats to his office, where photos of his military comrades reveal that he and Shapaev once served in the army together and have been friends since childhood. Looking at Shapaev's photo, the director announces the start of preparations for the rescue mission. Kovalev learns that only one module section remains intact. On Mars, Shapaev activates a robot to explore the area around the module, while Kovalev finds out that the module's power, designed for 30 months, will actually only last 13. The rescue expedition can be launched in 190 days, aligning with the phases of Mars and Earth. Similar developments exist in China and America. If agreements are reached with them, the rescue can be achieved within 13 months. But Shapaev must survive on extreme rationing. Dissenter psychologist Anna is ready to work with the astronaut as much and whenever needed to help him endure the upcoming year. Meanwhile, on Mars, Shapaev's robot detects an unidentifiable movement outside. Anna contacts the astronaut as it's important to know his psychological state, but Shapaev assures her that everything is fine. After talking with Shapaev, the minister announces that the expedition was a success. Since the module is established on the surface, the astronaut is alive and agrees to participate in the reality show. At Central Flight Control, television crews start their activities. Kovalev's protests are dismissed by the television corporation president, reminding him that this is all for the astronaut's rescue. TV host Grisha advises Chapayev to simply listen to him for the show to succeed. And so, the show begins. The TV host introduces the world to the men cast to the edge of the universe, but Chapayev takes the floor and starts simply talking to people, sharing what he has learned about Mars. He does this with a great sense of humor, winning the love of the Earthlings. However, the man struggles with the loneliness on an alien planet. One day, he contacts Earth because he heard strange sounds, but the communication specialist Peter detects nothing unusual, and Chapayev disconnects. During this time on Earth, the TV host again urges the president of the television corporation to abandon the filming, but he then reveals the true nature of the show. Live observation of a man on the brink of life and death. Chapayev quickly becomes first a Russian and then an international celebrity. He is nicknamed the Alien. Videos of his broadcasts about the structure of the universe rapidly gain views on social media, and his live connections draw vast audiences. Children ask their questions, to which the astronaut responds simply and clearly, earning him immense love from viewers. However, some envy the astronaut's fame. Anna's fiancé, Pyotr, starts to feel jealous of Chapayev, with whom she communicates for several hours a day, a fact noted by the TV host. Unexpectedly, the downside of the show becomes apparent. The live broadcasts consume a lot of energy, and Chapayev can only survive under conditions of increased conservation. But the president of the television corp insists on continuing the show, as the more money they earn, the faster they can organize a rescue expedition. Kovalev announces an increase in broadcasts despite Anna's outrage. Meanwhile, on Mars, Chapayev continues to conduct planned experiments and occasionally hears strange sounds, which Pyotr consistently misses. One day, the astronaut begins to suffer from terrible headaches caused by some unknown radiation, but then they suddenly stop, and he hears his mother's voice, which delights him. The next day, he tells young viewers about the universe, space, and Earth. The children listen to him, holding their breath. Suddenly, he confesses that from the very first day on Mars, he felt like he was hearing sounds, as if someone was trying to talk to him, and now he is sure that he is not alone on Mars. This conversation causes alarm at the flight control center. Apparently, Chapayev is starting to hallucinate. The minister demands to find out what is happening with Chapayev. Psychologist Anna requests a private conversation with the astronaut. Chapayev confesses that the sounds he heard seem to express what is inside him, as if he is the cause of everything happening, not the consequence, as if there is no time, no space, not even Mars. It seems the people created this reality and are now trying to understand it. People create universes, planets, harmony, or destroy them, and he feels like he is the cause of everything happening on Mars, and people are the cause of what is happening on Earth. Only on Earth there are many people, and everything is so confused, but on Mars, he is alone. The astronaut is surprised that no one but him hears sounds like a melody, and Anna concludes that these are hallucinations. During the next broadcast, Chapayev suddenly confesses that he feels lost. The TV host has to convince Chapayev that Earthlings are waiting for his return, but suddenly, the astronaut stops talking to Anna. He tries to explain that he encountered something anomalous on Mars, but the flight control center considered him insane. So, Chapayev deemed them insane. Earth was becoming more distant from him. Then, one day, communication specialist Pyotr also catches strange signals. He tries to talk to Anna, but she, upset by the astronaut's behavior and her fiancé's jealousy suspicions, doesn't listen. By the next broadcast, Chapayev does not make contact at the appointed time. Anna tries to call him to talk, but unsuccessfully. Strangely, the president of the television corporation is only pleased by this. He contacts the minister and proposes to discuss the issue of power, as if Chapayev supports Rogachev, he could win the elections and become president. Meanwhile, on Mars, the search robot discovers an unknown, shapeless creature, previously unseen. Back on Earth, Rogachev calls Pyotr and orders him to establish communication with Mars. He has a business proposal that Chapayev cannot refuse. Later, the astronaut goes on air with a rather strange message about life on Mars, showing a toy Martian. Then he agrees to participate in a new show called Chapayev Knows, where he starts giving advice in virtually all spheres of human life. He becomes the most popular person on the planet. Anna realizes that something is wrong, and one day she literally corners her fiancé, demanding he tell her everything he knows, and he confesses that there were indeed some sounds on Mars, but it's impossible to talk to Chapayev because all communication channels are blocked. The astronaut continues to explore Mars with the robot. Meanwhile, on Earth, Kovalev comes to the minister. The money is collected, and it's time to start the rescue expedition. But suddenly, the minister declares that rescue is impossible under any circumstances. Chapayev is a routine loss. The funds raised from the show have disappeared into thin air. The program is winding down, and Kovalev is fired. Meanwhile, Chapayev continues to experience headaches from the unintelligible sounds emitted by an unknown entity attacking the module. At the same time, Kovalev approaches the president of the television corporation for help, and he asks to wait until tomorrow. The next day, the show starts with Chapayev urging Earthlings to vote for Rogachev, who has nominated himself for president. But at the moment when the minister is bowing before the monitors, a special forces group bursts into the television center. The broadcast is interrupted, and everyone sees that it was not Chapayev, but the TV host addressing the people. It turns out that a duplicate of the module was built in one of the television studios, and a computer model of the astronaut was created. The police began an investigation to identify the client of this monstrous scam, asserting that there was no accident on Mars, and thus, no astronaut. Supposedly, the entire story was invented for the show. Kovalev is in despair. All hope is fallen. He won't be able to save his friend. Meanwhile, Rogachev is arrested. Kovalev breaks into the flight control center as TV reports the death of Chapayev. Kovalev fights with the special forces. A gunshot is heard. At this time, the president of the television corporation contemplates that Chapayev never existed. Never. But the astronaut does exist. A wounded Kovalev reaches the employees of the flight control center and contacts Chapayev on Mars. He apologizes for Earthlings who are only interested in money and power. Kovalev tells his friend that the government decided to tell the world that there was no module, no landing on Mars, and Chapayev died several months ago on Earth while on duty. It was all fiction for the show, but if he could give people a sign, then the connection is cut off. An emergency news broadcast airs. American satellites recorded an explosion on the surface of Mars in the Cupid's Plateau area. All experts affirmed that it was the module of the International Martian Expedition, which is direct evidence that astronaut Chapayev was indeed on Mars. The astronaut, after the explosion of the module, goes into the deserts of Mars and talks about what the unknown Martian entity told him. Chapayev understood that humans inadvertently are the creators of the material universe. Each moment in time is an act of creation of the universe. Humans are creators who come and simultaneously create this material world to understand it. It's like the double-slit experiment in quantum physics, a well-known experiment confirming the immaterial nature of our universe, where elementary particles become matter only when observed. Humans are the cause of all misfortunes and catastrophes in the universe, just as each person individually is the cause of everything happening in their own life on Earth. Therefore, only humans can change this life, the world, and the entire universe, if they can change themselves. Next, we see how Chapayev voluntarily dissolves and merges with the universe, from which each of us appears in this world. After a young priest arrives on an isolated island, supernatural events, incredible miracles, and frightening omens begin to occur. And it turns out that all of this is caused by the blood of an angel, which turns people who drink it into demons. Riley Flynn looks in horror at the girl hit by his car. The man realizes he is guilty because he was drunk, but there is nothing he can do about it. Later, the man freely admits his guilt and goes to prison, where every night before going to sleep he sees the girl he killed. 4 years have passed. Riley's mother, Annie, eagerly awaits his son's arrival in his homeland, a fishing village on Crockett Island off the coast of Washington state, and raises her youngest son, Warren, forbidding him to go to the peat bogs. But the boy wouldn't listen to her lecturing, and having met his friends, he goes to the forbidden place because no one will prevent the young people there from trying illegal substances and having a great time. They buy the stuff from a local dealer and go to the peat bogs. On the way, the guys stop at the house where Lisa lives. The girl cannot walk. She refuses the offered treat, and the trio goes on their way. At this time, a young man with a huge box locked with padlocks enters the door of the local priest's house. The boys get into a boat and make their way to the far shore of the island. It's already dark, so when they hear a sound of huge wings, the boys mistake them for a giant heron taking off. The peat bogs are also teeming with stray cats that were brought here from the mainland, and they feed on old remains because up until the 1920s people buried their dead right in the yards. And now when the peat bogs get flooded, those remains resurface. Warren knows this because after storms all this creepiness washes ashore where their house stands. The boys settle in their usual spot and after taking some revelatory substances start telling tales about local ghosts. At that moment, loud cat cries are heard from the bushes, and Warren, shining his flashlight in that direction, sees two burning eyes following them. But they immediately disappear, and the boy forgets about the incident. In the morning, Riley arrives on the island. Annie meets her son and apologizes for his father and younger brother who could not meet him because they were out fishing. Meanwhile, the ferry is met by a zealous parishioner, Bev Keane, who is concerned about the long absence of Father Pruitt. But the priest is not on the ferry. Meanwhile, teacher Erin Grin undergoes an ultrasound examination of the unborn child, and the doctor assures her that there is nothing wrong with the baby. The women pay attention to Riley, from which they are distracted by the appearance of the doctor's elderly mother who suffers from dementia. Annie introduces her son to the new sheriff, and the latter greets the boy. The sheriff then wakes up the only detainee, local alcoholic Joe, who came running in the night screaming that a huge albatross was chasing him. The sheriff releases sobered-up Joe, and he walks out to his dog, who has been waiting for his master at the exit all night. Bev, who is passing by, is indignant. The dog is dangerous, it could attack, but they don't listen to her. Meanwhile, Riley and Annie reach their house. The woman shares her problems. There has been an oil spill accident, and now fishermen can only catch fish according to their quota. Naturally, this causes money problems. Previously, hundreds of families lived on the island, but now there are only dozens left. In the meantime, there is a meeting at the school because a storm is coming to the island very soon, and it is necessary to make sure the shelter is ready. The new sheriff calls for it to be equipped in the school, but Bev objects. Everything has been ready in the church for a long time, and there is no need to change anything. All members of the Flynn family finally get together for dinner. Riley informs them that he has to travel to the mainland to check in with the Alcoholics Anonymous, which is one of the conditions for his release. Warren talks about the new teacher, a daughter of an ex. Riley perks up. Is Erin really back on the island? And learns of her pregnancy. Annie announces that their old priest, Father Pruitt, has made the trip to the Holy Land, despite his age-related problems. Warren serves as an altar boy and is aware of the pastor's forgetfulness. Riley disappoints his parents. He has no intention of going to church, which incurs the wrath of his father, a devout Catholic. Meanwhile, Bev notices a light in the windows of Pruitt's house and, upon entering, stares in surprise at the man who meets her. And in the shoreline thickets, attacks on the cats begin to occur. Before going to bed, the father tells Riley that after what happened to him, Annie goes to church every day and prays for him. He asks the boy to at least sit in the pew, for it is very important to his mother. At this time, the new sheriff and his son perform namaz before going to bed. The doctor catches the mother trying to climb to the second floor, and Riley sees Warren climb out the window to go to his friends. At night, Riley as usual sees recurrent dreams of the dead girl and of himself sitting in the boat. The dawn is breaking. The altar workers are preparing for the upcoming church service and notice that the wine bowls are already full. The congregation takes their seats. Bev opens the service, people sing hymns while the new priest enters the room. Paul Hill has been sent to replace Father Pruitt, who has left and is hospitalized on the mainland. Paul conducts the service and administers communion to the faithful, except for Riley, who has refused to do so. The new priest calls all the parishioners by name, explaining this by Pruitt's stories. Riley decides to accompany Erin, and the young people reminisce about their past encounters and talk about their experiences. They both vowed not to go back, but nevertheless they are on the island again. Riley lost everything after the accident, and Erin is separated from her husband. The man admits that he read all about different religions while he was in prison because he hoped to find God, but ended up being an atheist. and here he is of no use to anyone and doesn't know how to move on. In the evening, the storm comes to the island and Riley sees what looks like Father Pruitt walking along the beach, but when he goes out to look, he finds no one. And in the morning, people find hundreds of dead cats on the beach. The citizens cannot determine the cause of death of these animals, although the sheriff suggests some kind of disease, until he discovers that there is not a drop of blood in their bodies. Riley admits to seeing Monsignor Pruitt at night, but nobody believes him. Later, the man travels to the mainland while Father Paul holds a service, but the church is almost empty. Of the regular parishioners, there's only Lisa, the mayor's paralyzed daughter. The priest gives her communion, then walks her home and learns that the girl's mutilation is the result of an accidental shooting by drunk Joe. In the meantime, Erin catches Bev in the storeroom, from where the woman takes a box of poison intending to poison the rats, which have become too numerous. And Father Paul comes to Dr. Sarah's house to administer communion to her sick mother. The elderly woman calls him by the name of Pruitt, which her daughter believes is a symptom of the developing dementia. Back on the island, Riley speaks to Erin. It becomes clear that the two were romantically involved in their early youth. And Annie suddenly notices that her eyesight has improved considerably. In the morning, Father Paul meets his flock at Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Easter Lent. He gives an inspiring speech about the rebirth of the island and the first disciples of Christ, the fisherman, and he reminds them, man must remember that he is dust, and to dust he shall return. After the blessing, the residents gather for the feast. Riley speaks to the priest and again recalls Father Pruitt. He is convinced his eyes did not betray him that night. It was Father Pruitt. Father Paul suggests starting an Alcoholics Anonymous group on the island so that Riley doesn't have to travel so far, especially since there are others here suffering from this evil. The fun is interrupted by an unpleasant incident. Joe's dog dies after eating food off the ground. A new morning arrives. Riley goes out fishing with his father because the father has a bad back. Meanwhile, the sheriff goes to the school pantry where Bev confesses that she left poison in some parts of the island and the dog really could have died from it. But it was unintentional and anyone could have taken the poison. In the evening, Riley visits Father Paul and reveals that Bev has extorted donations for the church from the parishioners after convincing them to accept an agreement with the oil company that poisoned the waters of the bay and to receive generous compensation. And it's the same story everywhere else in the world. Villages are getting poorer and churches are getting more luxurious. The father reminds Riley that he was once a believer, and the boy expresses his contempt for the doctrine of good deity because the idea that suffering leads to purification is appalling. At night, Erin sees a mysterious creature near her house and noticing the bloody discharge rushes to the doctor. But Sarah reassures the woman there is nothing wrong with her baby. Later, she has to convince the frightened mother that she just imagined a face in the window. Meanwhile, the dealer passing by an empty house hears strange noises inside. He walks through the door and is attacked. It is morning and Father Paul, for some reason, takes a particularly close look at Lisa. Then he insists that the girl get up from her chair and come up for communion. And to everyone's shock, Lisa gets up and walks up to the priest. At night, Father Paul enters the confessional and tells himself that he is lying to the parishioners. After all, Father Pruitt was sicker than they thought, and having gone to the Holy Land, the man often fell behind the group. But the parishioners don't need to know that. They will believe that their shepherd is being healed on the mainland and will soon return to the island to witness the miracles that are happening. For after Lisa's recovery, which is perceived by the residents as a miracle, a religious revival begins on Crockett Island. Except that Father Paul himself becomes sick and vomits blood after the accomplishment, which Bev sees, and then the woman notices a newspaper clipping with Father Pruitt's portrait hanging on the wall of the priest's house. The doctor examines Lisa and cannot understand the miracle that has occurred, but her parents strongly oppose her examination on the mainland. And later, the woman finds her mother on the second floor of the house, to which she climbed on her own, although she has not been able to walk for a long time. Meanwhile, suffering people begin to converge on the church, which pleases Bev immensely but displeases Father Paul. He doesn't need the publicity, especially since many, including Riley, think it's a misdiagnosis by doctors. But that same evening, a miracle happens to his father. The man suddenly stops having back pain and even asks his wife to dance. At this time, Lisa summons Warren and the couple runs off to have fun, and Riley goes to Erin. More and more parishioners come to the morning mass. And one day Warren catches Father Paul pouring some kind of liquid into the wine, and during the sermon the priest suddenly collapses without feeling. The story shifts to the time of Father Paul's confession, in which he tells the true story of Monsignor Pruitt. After a visit to Jerusalem near Damascus, he was caught in a sandstorm and took refuge in ancient ruins. This is where Father Paul comes to his senses. He is examined by Sarah, though the man is against any intervention. Meanwhile, the sheriff finds a Bible in his son Ali's possession, and Lisa visits Joe and confesses that she hated him for years for stealing her future, but eventually forgives him. That same day at the school assembly, the sheriff tries unsuccessfully to convince Bev to stop handing out the Bibles to public school students. Later, Erin confesses that she's intimidated by Bev's confidence in her rightness, and Riley shares with her Father Paul's assignment to write penitential letters to loved ones. That same evening, Sarah's mother begins to speak quite sensibly, much to the doctor's surprise. And touched by Lisa's forgiveness, Joe decides to attend the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with Riley and Father Paul because he intends to change his life. The men go home and Joe confesses that he recently buried his sister on the mainland. That same evening, Ali asks for his father's permission to attend the mass. The kid is interested in everything that happens in the church, but the sheriff is against it. They are Muslims. Ali reminds him it's his father's decision, not his. But the father recalls how his dying wife praised Allah until the very last moment. God cannot decide who gets a miracle and who does not. The sheriff turns off the light and jumps away from the window because behind it is a pale face, but the next moment there is nothing. In the meantime, Father Paul collapses in front of Bev and the congregation and dies coughing up blood. The action carries over to the moment when Pruitt takes refuge in the dark cave. He burns matches, trying to make out the room where he is trapped, and suddenly sees two burning eyes. Then he is attacked by a nightmarish creature that sucks his blood and drinks his own blood in return. The priest concludes that it is an angel because when he wakes up in the morning, Pruitt finds that he is young again. So he decided to take his savior with him. He rode ahead, waiting for the angel to catch up with him. And he was very much afraid that the angel would disappear. Here on the island he hid it from everyone and lied to the parishioners because he was Father Pruitt. The next moment the priest comes back to life. During a scheduled checkup, the doctor informs Erin that her uterus is empty. It was probably a miscarriage. The woman is shocked. How could she not have noticed it at such a late stage? Meanwhile, Bev cancels the mass and her assistant notices the incredible resemblance between Father Paul and Monsignor Pruitt. She is convinced of the miracle and the others are simply frightened. Bev enters the priest's room and discovers that he cannot stand the light. It is also as if he can feel God inside him. Bev persuades him to manifest the miracle to his new apostles. Riley notices an improvement in his father's well-being, and the father confesses his unjust anger towards his son and asks for forgiveness for his omissions. Meanwhile, Sarah is collecting Erin's tests when her mother enters the office. She answers her daughter's questions confidently and looks much better than before. And then Sarah sees the blood in the test tube begin to boil in the sun and burn to the ground. In the meantime, distraught, Erin spends the day with Riley, mourning her unborn child and discussing their childhood. She resents her mother, who was a real dictator and never loved her daughter. And then she managed to marry her mother's mental double, which only her pregnancy saved her from. She just packed up and left. Then Riley recounts his dream. At this time, Father Paul is reciting prayers, which makes him sick, and then he notices the mark of the cross on his hand. He cuts his hand and drinks his blood. Joe tries to talk himself out of buying alcohol and he succeeds with great difficulty. At night, Father Paul holds an evening communion at the house of the doctor's elderly mother, Mildred, who recognizes him as Monsignor Pruitt. Meanwhile, Riley and Erin talk about their ideas of the afterlife and the basics of religion, after which they feel better. That same evening, Joe stops by Father Paul's house and witnesses Father Paul drinking communion wine. Joe looks at the portrait of Pruitt on the wall. Father Paul looks very much like him. The priest embraces Joe, who pulls away, falls, and smashes his head. Seeing the blood, the priest loses his mind and takes to drinking it. In the morning, Riley explains that his dream has changed. Erin has appeared in it, and the woman is sent to the mainland to another doctor. Meanwhile, Bev discovers Joe's dead body and exhausted Father Paul. She asks the mayor's wife to sing hymns, and she herself orders a couple of parishioners to dispose of the corpse. Bev believes that the priest's actions are justified and that his resurrection is a foreshadowing of Christ's second coming. At this time, Aaron hears an expert opinion of the doctor who doubts that the pregnancy was real. By evening, Father Paul feels good again. He holds an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting explaining Joe's absence by his trip to see his sister, but Riley knows that this is not true and leaves the meeting confused. When he arrives home, he tells his mother about the priest's lies. At night, Father Paul is visited by Angel, who begins to fill the goblet with his blood, while Riley, determined to deal with it, returns to the recreation center. He opens the doors and is attacked by Angel. In the morning, Sarah's mother impresses her daughter with her blooming appearance, and the sheriff is approached by the mother of the missing dealer, who asks him to track down her son. Meanwhile, the parishioners are informed that the Mass has been postponed until midnight due to Father Paul's illness, and the startled people view Mildred, who is considerably younger. Aaron, concerned about Riley's sudden disappearance, files a missing persons report with the sheriff, but the letter suggests that Riley may have gone on a bench or committed suicide. At Good Friday Mass, Father Paul delivers a sermon replete with militaristic rhetoric, urging the congregation to prepare for war as soldiers in the Lord's army. This sermon upsets Mildred, who forbids her daughter to attend the church any further. At night, Aaron is visited by Riley, who asks her to go in a boat with him. The woman agrees, even though she suspects something is amiss. After sailing far from the island, Riley recounts what has happened to him. After Angel's attack, he quickly recovered under Father Paul's care. When Riley tried to go outside, he was burnt and was forced to return and listen to the revelations of Father Paul. The priest is convinced that the angel's blood is a gift from God, and he mixes it into his communion wine to cure the people of Crockett Island of all illnesses. The priest also admitted that he had killed Joe, but according to him, the murder was justified. He also believes that the vampirism traits they both display are the grace of God, which Bev fully agrees with. Father Paul demonstrated to the boy his desire for blood as food, but reassured him that this would soon pass. Nevertheless, Riley is not ready to acknowledge what has happened as divine providence, while the priest reminds him of the fear of all who have seen miracles. Meanwhile, Bev brings Riley the goblet of the congregation's blood and he drinks it. The priest releases Riley without listening to Bev's objections, for the man's rebirth is complete. Outside, Riley notices how his perception has changed. The colors are brighter and the air more saturated, and he witnesses a conversation between Mildred and his daughter. He visits his sleeping family before heading over to Aaron's. Then they head out to sea, where he has nowhere to go. Riley confesses his love for Aaron and asks the woman to flee the island. She reciprocates, but at this moment the dawn breaks. Riley sees in the boat the girl he killed in the accident. She smiles and takes his hand. Riley ignites and burns, turning to ash, and Aaron screams in terror. The relatives find Riley's letters while Aaron returns to the island and tells Sarah about what is happening in the city. The doctor shows how her blood samples are vaporized by the sunlight and shows rejuvenated Mildred. At this time, Paul confesses to Bev that he senses Riley's death, but the woman reassures him that the boy, having received a great gift, has chosen his own path. She reminds him of Judah, who is also part of God's plan. Sarah shares with Aaron and Mildred her theory that Father Paul is spreading a miracle-creating virus through communion wine. This would also explain the missing pregnancy. After all, it is a foreign element in the body which the virus has decided to deal with dramatically. At this time, Ben brings his son's letters to Father Paul. He senses that something bad has happened. One of the letters is addressed to his father, and Ben asks him to give it to the Monsignor. After Ben leaves, Paul opens the letter and receives a quote, a reminder that they are all ashes, and to dust they shall return. And Aaron tries to tell Annie about Riley's death, but the angry woman throws her out, not wanting to believe the terrible news. Sarah informs the sheriff of her suspicions about what is happening in the church, but he refuses to take any action, not wanting to further aggravate relations with the locals, especially since he has already encountered unfair and prejudicial treatment. Aaron, Sarah, and Mildred decide to move to the mainland, but find that the mayor has sent the ferries away for repairs, and the fishing boats are almost all in need of repairs. During the night, the power and mobile network go out, which are also shut down by Bev's handmaidens. Aaron decides to go to the Mass to see the danger for herself. Meanwhile, the sheriff allows his son to attend the midnight Mass, and he asks his father to go with him. Before the mass begins, the townspeople make a procession around the island with candles and hymn singing. The service begins with Father Paul confessing to Allah. Then he confesses that he's Monsignor Pruitt. And today is the beginning of a new era for all of them because holy blood flows in their veins. He calls a parishioner and asks him to drink poison, to die and be reborn. The man drinks it and drops dead. When some people see this, they rush to the exit, but the angel in shining garb stands in the doorway. The creature reaches the dais and spreads his wings to the astonished gaps of the people, and then the dead man comes to life and gets to his feet. Bev and her assistants bring out cups of poison and hand them out to everyone present. The sheriff tries to take Ali away, but the boy pulls out his hand. He wants to stay with God. That is when the policeman pulls out his gun, but the congregation rushes at him and throws him to the floor. The boy, in spite of his father's screams, drinks the poison. Lisa's parents do the same, but the girl refuses. Unimaginable things are happening all around. Some are drinking the poison, the others are pushing the cups away. Then Mildred raises the sheriff's gun and shoots Father Paul in the head. A vampire attacks her and carries her away in his claws from the church. Bev orders the doors to be locked. Meanwhile, Ali comes back to life. The dead parishioners are resurrected as vampires and hungry attack those who have not drunk the poison. All hell breaks loose with screams and blood everywhere. Ed turns into a vampire and Sheriff Aaron, Lisa, Sarah, Warren and Annie flee. But Bev gets in their way. Aaron shoots her, after which the group escapes. Father Paul regains consciousness while resurrected Bev and her assistants send vampires to attack the townspeople who are not present at the church. After the parishioners turned vampires have left the church, Father Paul is resurrected and, disappointed by the outcome of the mass, removes his robes and remains sitting alone on the steps of the altar of the bloody church, looking at Mildred, who has also turned. Screams can be heard in the town. The vampires are killing their loved ones and converting them. Meanwhile, the group of the runaways hide out in Aaron's house, pondering over a future plan of action. Warren recalls his canoe, which is hidden on the outskirts of the island, and Aaron realizes that the vampires needed the boats for something. She becomes terrified at the thought that some of the monsters might make it to the mainland. Suddenly, a burning bottle flies in through the window, setting the house on fire. It is Bev. She wants to settle the score with Aaron, who shot her. To allow the group to escape, Annie distracts the attackers by exposing Bev's motives. She is just jealous that God loves everyone without singling her out. Bev, who is always so right and so good, must be furious. Then Annie commits suicide by seducing the vampires with her blood. Meanwhile, John Pruitt recalls his affair with Mildred, which resulted in the birth of Sarah, who was forced to live with her fake father as such circumstances were unacceptable for the pastor. The priest admits that the main reason for bringing Angel to the island was his desire to cure Mildred and live in peace with her and his daughter as a full family. The survivors decide to split up. The adults go to burn the boats prepared by the vampires to leave for the mainland to spread vampirism, while Lisa and Warren flee toward the peat bogs where the younger Flynn's canoe is stored. Along the way, they encounter other vampires more than once, attacking innocent people who have not attended the midnight mass. Drunk on blood, Bev proposes not to extinguish the house, but instead to burn every building on the island, following the biblical story of the end of the world and the Ark, which will be the building of the rehabilitation center. She and her assistant go to burn the city, unaware that some converts who have not lost their reason and morals refuse to kill. Among them are Riley's parents, who find each other in the middle of the night. The sheriff, Aaron, and Sarah meanwhile set fire to the boats, and Lisa and Warren hide in an abandoned house, unaware that they have entered the lair of the beast. The girl lights a match and sees the angel drinking blood of the man dragged into the house. Lisa shoots the monster, but he's so engrossed in what he's doing that he doesn't even notice them. Then Lisa douses the room with fuel, and walking out the door they set fire to the house, but the angel breaks free and flies off into the night. At this time, Bev has already prepared a center for the converts to wait out the dawn and calls them out with the sound of a bell. She quotes statements about the Ark, but Pruitt abandons her idea and is unwilling to be the leader of the converts. Bev reports that the boats are burned, while Lisa and Warren mentally say goodbye to their families and get into their canoe. Bev takes command and throws the atheist convert out of the Ark, mocking his desire to save himself with the believers. Monsignor, on the other hand, invites the man to stay in the church, for God loves everyone regardless of their views because everyone is worthy of salvation. But once inside the church, John sees Sarah, who is going to burn everything with kerosene and a lighter. He confesses that he's her father and regrets that he didn't get to know her better. But at that moment, one of Bev's underlings shoots Sarah. Enraged, Pruitt attacks him, wanting to kill him, but stops himself in time, remembering who he is and where he is. John tries to save Sarah and lets her drink his blood to turn her into a vampire, but she spits it back out, wanting to die human. John and Mildred mourn their daughter's death. They take her body, burn the church, and leave for the bridge by the river, a memorable place where Sarah often played as a child. Meanwhile, the walls of the rehab center are doused with kerosene by the surviving sheriff. Bev mocks the sheriff's religion and shoots him, and Erin emerges from the building, spilling kerosene inside, but is picked up by a flying vampire, taking her aside and gnawing at her neck. But then Ali picks up the lighter and throws it into the building. Bev takes another shot at the sheriff, but his son rushes to the man and takes him away. Realizing that there are no more places to wait out the dawn, the converts disperse, wanting to spend their last moments with their loved ones. Slowly dying, Erin shreds the wings of the blood-sucking vampire with a knife, after which the vampire struggles to rise into the air. He is spotted by Lisa and Warren, who are watching the shore from the boat, and they note the monster's slow speed and that he's unlikely to make it to the mainland before dawn. Erin dies looking up at the stars and remembering Riley. Bev leaves to meet the dawn on the beach. The wounded sheriff and his son also go to the shore, where together they begin to pray, adhering to their native religion. Monsignor Pruitt and Mildred sit on the bridge holding Sarah's body. The father renounces the church and begs his beloved for forgiveness. Finally, dawn breaks. Ali burns in the sunlight, sitting by his father's dead body. Desperate, Bev tries to dig a shelter in the sand and burns up in hysterics. Riley's parents, in a crowd of similarly converted people, greet the dawn by singing hymns praising the Lord. All the islanders burn while Pruitt and Mildred kiss against the rising sun. The only survivors, Lisa and Warren, watch the fire. Suddenly, the girl confesses that she can no longer feel her legs. And that's the end of the series. Write in the comments what you think of this series.